Hello, my fellow Westorians. Greetings. I'm Aziz. With me is Ashea. This is Valar Rereadis, where we look for the foreshadowing we missed, new depth in the world building, a better understanding of the plot lines, greater familiarity with the characters, and more fun than you can fit in all 7 hells. Thanks to anyone supporting us on Patreon. You keep the lights on and the videos and podcasts coming. We really appreciate the support here in the sort of downtime of the A Song of Ice and Fire fandom. Nothing new coming for a little while, but we keep on going, as always. The illustrated Clash of Kings book is out. Shout out to our History of Westeros Facebook mods who every week put up each of the chapters that we're going to talk about for Valar Rereadis and lead discussions on that. They also always post art with it, and this week we've been seeing some of the art from this book, which is beautiful. There's really, really beautiful artwork in here. Look at that. That is incredible, right? I hope you can actually see it pretty well here. If not, well, you know where to find it.
Yes, they can.
Good. And, of course, another place to find it, if you didn't know, is on our website, historyofwesteros.com. We've got links up there to purchase it, and you can help the show out a little bit when you use those links. After Valar Rereadis today, I will be on Steven Stark's I Know That Nerd show, which is going to be, well, it's basically an interview, fun interview. We're going to talk about various things, I suppose, about me and history of Westeros and my time in this fandom and everything. Well, I don't know exactly what Steven's going to ask me, so I'm just guessing. But you'll have to tune in to find out, and hope you do. Should be a lot of fun. But today on Valar Rereadis, we have Jon 4, the one with the wild ghost chase, a.k.a. the gang stashed a Dragonglass cache.
Bran 5, the gang dreams about the shores of Winterfell, a.k.a. the one where Ser Rodrik should have killed Reek.
Tyrion 8, the gang wants Renly's leavings, a.k.a. the purple wedding pre-planning party.
Theon 3, the gang hunts wild hares, a.k.a. the one with Theon's big plan.
Arya 8, the lion gang leaves Harrenhal, a.k.a. the one with Basilisk blood.
And Catelyn 5, the gang returns to Riverrun, a.k.a. the one with Edmure's big plan.
Now this is the shortest group in terms of audiobook length. It's only about 148 minutes, the chapter lengths in audiobook time, as compared to the longest part, which was A Clash of Kings Part 4. Now, of course, these are our arbitrary divisions, but still, that part was 248 minutes of audiobook length. So a full 100-minute difference. Now, of course, length of chapter doesn't necessarily directly indicate how much we have to say about each chapter, but there is some correlation. But one of the cool things about doing these chapters in batches, something I've noticed as we've been doing this, is the patterns George often lays out in chapters that have proximity to each other. For example, he may introduce a character in one chapter and talk about that character's castle or the lands they come from in another chapter. For example, Edmure Bran gets that treatment in this batch. I don't even think he had been mentioned, or if he had, he'd been barely mentioned. But in this one, we get a letter from Robb saying he's at Ashmark, the stronghold of House Marbrand, where we also see Edmure Bran leading his men out of Harrenhal a day before Tywin's and the rest of the armies leave Harrenhal, and Arya and other people witness that. So that's a wonderful thing that George does to develop the world and make the world building more robust and to connect the dots. And we love to connect dots here. George loves to leave those breadcrumbs, and we love to pick them back up. But a bigger theme this time, much more pervasive theme than any particular character being introduced, is pride. It's a big theme throughout all the books, but it's particularly prominent in this set of chapters. Theon, Dagmar Cleftjaw, Tyrion, Tywin, of course. It's always about pride when you're dealing with Tywin, right? Cersei, Edmure, Jeor Mormont even. So many of their actions are driven by pride, and we don't even really see, say, Stannis in this batch. And he's another character that pride is very associated with. So, keep your ears peeled. Your ears peeled? Keep your ears peeled for all those connections, those indications of pride, plus all the other dots that we're going to connect today. And, oh, look, it's a super chat from Maura Lee. Have to miss this as I'm at work, but we'll watch later. Love your channel and all the fabulous content. Ashea is the best. Cats rule. I can't disagree with any of that. In fact, I agree with all of it very thoroughly. Thank you, Maura. Let's get going. John 4, the one with the wild ghost chase, a.k.a. the gang stashed a Dragonglass cache. Yeah, that's kind of hard to say. Let's go right to the first line.
It.
I didn't. I did not say it correctly. I said Dragongrass, I think.
You said grash.
Grash? Dragongrass. Dang it. I didn't even say a real word. Well, let's hit it with the first quote of the first line of the chapter.
The hill jutted above the dense tangle of forest, rising solitary and sudden, its wind-swept heights visible from miles off.
Now, that's a big, important hill, because that is the Fist of the First Men. It's really interesting and evocative to think about what they were thinking about as they pulled up, what kind of old battles had been fought here, and how long ago were they fought. It would have been really cold this far north, even back in the day when the seasons weren't wacky, because, well, it's really far north. That's just how it works, right? So you wonder what they were fighting up here. This is, even back then, it probably wasn't fertile. It probably wasn't some great territory to hold, but land is land and people fight over it. So I suppose that's a explanation enough. But you wonder if there were battles fought against the others, if battles against the undead had happened here or anything like that. That's a little different than thinking about fighting versus humans, which is an important point because all of Gior's preparations, all of the Night's Watch preparations in this scene and the accompanying chapters are centered around preparing to fight against humans, which they, of course, don't really do. It's the undead that catch them, and so their preparations are not in line with the enemy they're about to face. We see Jeor Mormont wearing down a bit. This is part of the pride angle. He's doing pretty well. I mean, considering his age and everything, he's up there, but he's doing pretty well. John notices that he's slowing down a little bit, but it's not like he's hurting a lot. He's still keeping up, but still, John notices, and that's noteworthy. The haunted forest is a big part of this setting here. John thinks of ghosts, which is quite a theme, right? We've got lots of talk of ghosts. We've been having talk of ghosts since, Ned is probably the biggest chapter, or biggest POV in terms of ghosts in the thematic sense from the start. But also, Tyrion has ghosts. John, like I said, is thinking of them here. Arya is the ghost in Harrenhal right now. And, later Theon, and Theon thinks about his father having ghosts, or his mother and father thinking of his two dead brothers. Things like that. Ghosts are, the version of the word ghost really varies depending on the context, but it's a very prominent theme right now and throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. So let's do a little bit of geography work here, because that's a big part of what's discussed in this chapter, the strategy of their placement, and it's kind of neat following their path. If you look at where they left, if you look at Castle Black, it's actually kind of straightforward. They just basically go northwest. You go northwest, eventually you hit Whitetree, then you hit Craster's Keep, then you hit the Fist of the First Men, and that's where they're at. And if you go west, directly west from there, you've got the Milkwater, which has several different forks. It's a little bit like the Trident, actually. And if you go straight north, following the Milkwater's northern fork, you get, we'll just call it the Then River. It doesn't seem to have a name, but it leads eventually, and I mean after quite a while, meaning even farther than they've traveled to get to this point. So they'd probably have to go 3 times as far as they've gone this point to get to the Valley of Then. But that is the point. That's where it leads. Farther to the northwest, instead of just due north, or much more north by northwest, you have the Skirling Pass. Then you have the Frostfangs kind of all around. Due west is more where a lot of that lies. So they're still looking for Benjen, and its hope is kind of dwindling on that front. But there's still some interesting indications here. This Dragonglass cache from this scene is really one of the few indications we have about Benjen, even though it isn't necessarily to do with Benjen, though I lean towards it was Benjen, but even that isn't certain. Tywin smells the cold again, which is really interesting because that keeps coming up. And as I've said before, if something comes up multiple times, something small like that, it's generally because George really wants you to notice. He wants to make sure you've noticed it because it's important. Jon agrees with Tywin. Other people are like, you can't smell the cold. But Jon's like, oh, yeah, you can. He remembers the white that he fought and thinks of that smell.
Hey,
And, what's that?
I mean, in Always Sunny, you can smell crime.
That's true. You could smell crime. But and I have a little more to say about this in a minute, about the smell of cold. But let's talk a little more about the cache here. There's arrowheads, dagger blades, spearheads, and perhaps most important of all is the horn, an aurochs horn banded in bronze. And anytime you see something banded in bronze, anytime you see bronze at all, it's like the old metal. So if something has bronze on it, it's a sign that it's old or ancient or, well, yeah, just that. If not mystical, like Mary Mazdur pulls out a copper bronze blade out of nowhere. There's the Royce armor.
Bronze Jon Royce is just really old.
Yeah. So what are all the questions about the Dragonglass cache? The most important one probably is who put it there. And, well, Benjen maybe. If not Benjen, who knows? It's really, that's the kind of a problem. It could be cold hands. That's the only other strong guess that we even have. And how did they get it? If it came from cold hands, well, there's a lot of possibilities because, well, he's, working for, in quotes, working for Bloodraven, meaning Bloodraven has access and magical powers. He knows things. There's all sorts of explanations that even though you're not privy to them, it's not hard to see how he could be aware of a stash of Dragonglass. But it does seem more likely it is Benjen. Which causes a few problems. Meaning, well, if it was Benjen, then why didn't Craster say he saw Benjen? Because, as I just explained, it's a straight shot northwest. There's no reason for Benjen to have bypassed Craster's Keep. We know he stayed there before. We know he doesn't have a huge problem with the guy. He's not like Jon where he refuses to sleep under his roof. So he's at least tolerant of Craster. So it probably isn't that. So it seems like Craster probably did lie. But if he did, the answer is, or the question is, why? Why did Craster lie about that? It's tough. I don't know. It might be, if we're getting really dark or really deep into it, maybe it relates to Craster having some sort of deal with the others. Kind of like how an ant makes a deal with a boot not to crush it. In other words, Craster has no power in this arrangement, really. But it's more a matter of survival for him. And you wonder how they communicate. We've brought that up before, maybe in dreams, maybe in he's getting dreams from the others in his head at night, and they're telling him to do these things. Who knows? We're all spitballing. We have no idea. But I'm a little puzzled as to why he would lie about Benjen, yet there seems to be pretty strong evidence he did. Now, why did Benjen do that? Why did he leave it there? Well, we may have gotten the answer in Jon and Gior's discussion of why they've chosen the Fist and why Gior isn't sending Rangers out. Jon's concerned that they won't find Benjen because they're not sending Rangers out. And Gior says, well, there's a lot of us. We're not exactly quiet. We're not exactly stealthy here. If we're here and Benjen's near, he'll find us. And that probably explains why, if it was Benjen or some sort of ally, they had the same level of thinking, which is, well, if this large army of Night's Watch comes through, they're going to stop here at the Fist because it's obviously a great strategic spot. It's obviously the kind of spot they would pick. They can't fail to notice that. Whether or not it's a smart choice to set up camp there is a different matter. The point is it's prominent and obvious. So if Gior thinks that Benjen can find them, Benjen might be thinking the same thing. He's like, well, they'll find this. Now, why would he hide it rather than bringing it back to the wall? Well, there's a couple potential answers there, and perhaps there's more answers that we're just not privy to at this point. Maybe something will be revealed. If we meet Benjen again at some point, he may have all sorts of explanations here. But if he's worried about being captured, I think that's a big one. That would explain why he would stash these things to make sure the horn isn't picked up by somebody else. I mean, look at what Grit tells Jon later. They were trying to open up these graves they were trying to find this horn. Well, if Benjen knows the wildlings are looking for a horn to bring down the wall, and he thinks he's found it, the last thing he wants to do is be caught with it. Better it be buried under the ground than on his person, because he is at risk of being caught. Now, that applies to not just the wildlings, but the others as well, because maybe the others want that horn too. Now, I don't think they can blow horns, but maybe there's a way they can get some human to blow it, kind of like how Dragonbinder needs someone else to blow it. That would be quite an interesting little ice and fire parallel if neither side, ice or fire, wants to blow their, prospective elemental horns, for lack of a better
word. Do you think
the
others can blow trumpets? What kind of horns? All horns?
No horns. No horns at all. They're without horn blowing abilities. It's a flaw in their species.
What about human horn?
They can't blow human horns either. They want to, though. They really, really want to. So a side mystery to all this is Ghost and why he won't enter the ring fort itself. Let's check out the quote here.
But when they reached the ring fort, Ghost balked again. He padded forward warily to sniff at the gap in the stones, and then retreated, as if he did not like what he had smelled. Jon tried to grab him by the scruff of his neck and haul him bodily inside the ring. No easy task. The wolf weighed as much as he did, and was stronger by far. Ghost, what's wrong with you? It was not like him to be so unsettled. In the end, Jon had to give it up. As you will, he told the wolf. Go, hunt. The red eyes watched him as he made his way back through the mossy stones.
That is pretty interesting, huh? So now, of course, later he does just show up inside the ring fort and leads Jon away. So the simple answer is that was it all along. He was just trying to get Jon to follow him, and Jon finally does it. But that doesn't really explain why he's concerned about the border. But once again, later, he's not that concerned about the border of the ring fort. So I'm not sure that this might be more peculiar than it is mysterious. There may not be a huge answer here. But, of course, a lot of people wrote in with the question, is Ghost being manipulated? Maybe not manipulated isn't necessarily the right word. Is Ghost being led, like Jon is, by Ghost, by Bloodraven? Is this sort of a leading by leading by leading sort of situation here? So I don't know. I think Bloodraven is leading Ghost, very not unlikely here. I don't know how Ghost would have known the cache was there and known that it was important. I mean, he could smell the cache, maybe smell the cloak underground there. But is that really going to be something that he's like, oh, I got to go get my master and have him see this? It's just a cloak. I mean, does he really care about does he smell the Dragonglass? I mean, that doesn't seem like something a wolf would just do without, a little supernatural influence. So Jon himself thinks of the dead, right? Because he remembers when Ghost warned him back when Othor and Jaffar Flowers rose at Castle Black. He thinks of that. But the situations are kind of hard to compare, since in that spot, Jon was locked in a room and Ghost was scratching at the door. So they're in close proximity. And as soon as Jon opens the door, he sees that his guard is dead. So he immediately is on alert. He knows exactly what's going on. There's some sort of, well, he doesn't know it's the undead, but he knows that there's enemies about. And in this case, well, since we're on a reread, we know that the undead aren't going to come until the prologue of A Storm of Swords. But this chapter has some legit chillingness to it because, he sees Ghost, he sees White Shadow, and you don't know if it's Ghost or something else. And it's got the feel of the undead nearby and the haunted forest. It's a pretty chilling chapter, even though it's more a setup than it is actual, horror climactic sort of situation. So we don't, and looking ahead, normally we look at these chapters, we can look ahead and say, we get answers because we see this happen. But this is an exception because the Benjen plot is not particularly well explained on TV. It's also, the horn. There's no Horn of Winter really on TV at all. They found the horn and then showed it on the screen for a little bit and then just kind of said, we're not going to actually do anything with this. Never mind that we showed you the horn. So which again, I'm of two minds of that. It would have been cool if the show had dealt with that, but the wonderful silver lining is we are completely in the dark. We still have an unknown, yet another supernatural plot that we don't know how it's going to resolve, and that's fun. We get to, we get to look forward to that. But we do have one thing to look ahead, at least one thing to look ahead for here. Jon 5. Let's consider this quote right here.
It was growing harder to cling to the hope of Benjen Stark's safe return. The cloak he had found beneath the fist could well have belonged to his uncle or one of his men. Even the old bear admitted as much, though why he would have buried it there, wrapped around the cache of Dragonglass, no one could say.
So let's be results-oriented here. I think it's, first of all, interesting that they don't use the cache. They find it, and they're all confused by it. He shows it to Gior and other people, and they're like, yeah, that's cool. And they all, they make some Dragonglass daggers, and Gior seems to like his, but he doesn't really use it. And no one seems to... It's kind of passed over. So that's kind of interesting. It looks like it's going to be really important, but it's not. Now, it kind of is, because it's a little bit useful when they're fighting the Whites and others at the beginning of A Storm of Swords. Because, hey, Sam kills one. It's the only other we've seen slain during the series, and it's a dagger that comes from this cache. But like I said, hardly anyone used it. Some of the arrows were fired off. We don't even know if Whites in the books are affected by Dragonglass. We know for sure they are in the show, but that has yet to be proven in the books. I tend to think they do matter because there's so much of it, right? There's this large amount of Dragonglass, and if it's only effective against the others who are kind of always standing in the back, they don't seem to be eager to come to the front lines to fight the humans, at least not in these larger engagements that we've seen. Not that we have a lot of data on how the others operate, but I tend to think that if the Dragonglass is only useful on the others themselves, well, I think they wouldn't be worried about... I think they would be more focused on just arrows. I don't know. It's something doesn't feel quite right about that, but it's still a mystery at this point.
Regarding, by the way, the cache left at the fist.
Yeah.
The relevance and all that. I think that part of what makes that important going forward and later is that it cements/spreads the idea that this is useful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because they start to realize it's useful, Sam's engagement. Then, by the time they realize it's good, they're sharing the Dragonglass arrows. The best archers get the most of them. So, yeah, they start to take more caution with it. Unfortunately, as we find out, they lose it. Most of the cache is left at the fist. They don't, they actually don't get to keep most of it. So they figure out how useful it is when it's almost too late. So that's too bad. Let's look a little farther here and quote the moment where Jon actually pulls out the cloak and finds what's in it, because it's really interestingly written.
Jon brushed the loose soil away to reveal a rounded bundle, perhaps 2 feet across. He jammed his fingers down around the edges and worked it loose. When he pulled it free, whatever was inside shifted and clinked. Treasure, he thought, but the shapes were wrong to be coins, and the sound was wrong for metal. A length of frayed rope bound the bundle together. Jon unsheathed his dagger and cut it, groped for the edges of the cloth, and pulled. The bundle turned, and its contents spilled out onto the ground, glittering dark and bright. He saw a dozen knives, leaf-shaped spearheads, numerous arrowheads. Jon picked up a dagger blade, feather light and shiny black, hiltless. Torchlight ran along its edge, a thin orange line that spoke of razor sharpness. Dragonglass, what the maesters call obsidian.
So let's return to the smell of cold for a minute here, because this is wrapped up in a lot of related plot lines. Not just the smell of cold from the others, but from the so-called good guy Whites, like Cold Hands, and maybe what Jon will be. So we mentioned that Tywin is talking about the cold, and Jon agrees with it, but he's not the only one. Bran, in A Dance with Dragons, his first chapter, has a similar reaction when he's inside Summer, when he meets Cold Hands. Quote,
Summer growled at him, his fur bristling. The direwolf did not like the way that Cold Hand smelled. Dead meat, dry blood, a faint whiff of rot, and cold all over.
So the dead have that smell regardless of whose side they're on. It's some sort of unnatural, supernatural odor that more sensitive people and animals can detect, apparently. We have Dywin, we have Jon, we have Summer, and they all use this same phrase. It smells like cold. So I somewhat recommend for this chapter, I somewhat recommend jumping ahead and reading the Storm of Swords prologue well before you get to the end of Clash. It just gives you an idea of what's happening because, as we know, in a chapter or two, I think it's the next Jon chapter, it is. He goes off with Corran. And then we have no idea what's happening on the Fist until we get Sam's flashbacks. So it's kind of neat to be able to keep track of what's happening while Jon's going even farther north. A few notes from Joe Buckley here. He compares Ghost refusing to go up the hill to Silverwing in Fire and Blood refusing to pass the wall, which is a neat comparison. I had not thought of that. That's pretty good. Supernatural creatures behaving peculiarly in areas that may also have supernatural locations involved. So that's pretty tight, even though it's still quite mysterious. So this thing about Gior here, I agree with Gior that he needs to know what's going on, that sending people out to figure out what they're doing is important, but taking a stand, taking a battle, laying out battle plans to fight this large army of wildlings doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of strategy. Now, I mean, in terms of writing, it's totally fine. It's absolutely okay for George to have decided Gior would do this. It's, again, a point of pride. Gior is maybe behaving like the traditional northerner in that when they get old, they go out into the snow to die, or fight one last battle. This is sort of a little of both. He's going out into the snow and he's kind of trying to fight a big battle that might be his last battle, because it's a little, I wouldn't go quite so far as to say it's suicidal, but it's definitely borderline suicidal. It's definitely more than brave, beyond brave. It's definitely brave, but so brave that it might be stupid. So yeah, use the wall. He's worried that Mance will get past. Well, is he really going to get past if you're on the wall? He might, but you'll have an easier time stopping him. So I don't know. Gior's pride, I think, is pretty important here in wanting to go out on his own terms, perhaps. Interesting quote that I didn't know what to think of when Jon is looking at Ghost, and there's a moment where, quote, there was something fierce and terrible about him in that instant. And Joe Buckley notes that Arya describes Nymeria's wolf pack with the same wording, and there's a dragon described that way in The Princess and the Queen. And maybe this is Jon looking into the true soul of Ghost and himself and the North, which is that the North we're presented is calmer and friendlier and more civilized than it used to be, especially because it's introduced to us through these very honorable, noble, likable characters in the Starks. But the truth is, the North is creepy, and its history is very creepy and supernatural and bloody, and of course it's associated with the others and the Children of the Forest and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good take, even though it's hard to know if that's really what George is getting at. It works for me either way. A couple of random thoughts and questions from y'all. From Newt Rock 44, maybe Craster sensed trouble with Benjen's detective work and sort of led him to the White Walkers like he did Jon, in a sense. Yeah, that's possible. He may not want to reveal that he set Benjen up. We talked about that briefly, I think, last time, that maybe he lied because he was setting up Benjen, and this time we talked a little more about how he may have communicated with the others, but it definitely seems possible, especially if we get into the others want some Stark blood for whatever reason. It could be, and then that's why they would want Benjen. Also from Newt Rock 44, it's curious because it doesn't seem to jive with the history. Direwolf's supposed to be north of the wall. Did they not remark about the Mother Wolf being so far south is strange? Yes, they did remark about that, and Direwolves are funky. We got another question that, how does Ghost know how to hunt, for example? That's from Jacob B. I believe that was on a question from Flick. Well, wolves are pack hunters in the real world. And we know, direwolves were real. They're extinct, but real world direwolves aren't really like George's direwolves. They have some things in common. I mean, of course, the supernatural stuff is obviously setting that aside. But scientists believe that direwolves hunted in packs too. So really, there's just no explanation here. These are just different kind of direwolves. These are just something else. They supernatural might explain how they know how to hunt without being taught. But it's true that packs, the younger wolves, watch the older wolves and learn from that behavior. But Ghost hunts solitary. So does Summer. So I think that, and that's not how real wolves hunt. So I think that we're just too far afield from real wolves to make that comparison. So it's just like human genetics. George has changed it for his setting. They just are something different. Aaron Miller suggests maybe Ghost smelled Benjen's scent, as in Benjen in particular, and that's why, meaning that was on the cloak. And that makes sense, because as John thinks it through, he realizes the cloak is not really old. It's recently buried, and that could mean it was Benjen's. Of course, if it was Benjen's, damn, dude, what is he going around the north without his cloak?
Yeah, that's how committed he was. He gave up his weaponry and his cloak.
He gave his cloak to Tyrion too, if you recall, when they were riding north. Like, he's like, you want my cloak?
Marrying
you look cold.
everyone.
He's like, yeah, I'll take
Did
it.
he marry Tyrion right then?
That's his wedding cloak. And this one, he's married to the ground. Is that like, that's symbolic of him becoming undead, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. We cracked it.
So the fact that the cloak isn't rotted and that John uses that as evidence for how it can't be too old, because he thinks, is this some ancient cache of the children of the forest? He's like, no, it can't be, because the cloak isn't rotted enough. Now, so that's important. It also comes up with Jaffer Flowers and Othor when Sam points out that the corpses aren't rotting, because even though it's really cold in the north, it's not cold 24/7, 365. Well, of course, 365 is the wrong number of days, but you get the point. It warms up sometimes, which means you can have grave worms and rot. But so that's when it's warmer, you can have those things. So what that says to me is it tells us a little something about Cold Hands. It's debated. One of the biggest debated things about Cold Hands, apart from what his identity is how old he is. And there's that line from Leaf that says they killed him long ago. And it's debated what long ago means. Is that long ago in the terms of the children of the forest, or is it long ago in the terms of
Bran,
the child who they're speaking to, like, your audience? Well, maybe we can't interpret it that we don't know for sure. But given this scene, Cold Hands, he's wearing Rangers clothing and it's not rotted off. Did he find new Rangers clothing to wear? Probably not. So this supports our belief that Cold Hands is not super ancient, that he's more of in the last 50, 60, 75 years. In other words, that perhaps a companion of Bloodraven, one of the Raven's Teeth, is my headcanon. Jaded Redhead says, whatever, all dogs are like that when you stand there with the door open. Cats too. That's a great comment. It's true. Like, do you want to go in or do you want to go out? Do you want to go in or do you want to go out? And they just look at you. God damn it. This is too real right here.
Also, I want to throw in there this other comment from Ridiculous Ed Tollett, which is very fitting. Take no wives says nothing about taking no husbands.
Nice. So it's always important for us to do a Raven watch. In this chapter, the Raven calls the fist old. Mormont thinks he's maybe talking about him. His pride comes up a little bit there. But it is old. The fist of the first man is really old, so it's kind of a double meaning. He asks for corn, as he often does. But also, here's perhaps the most important quote from the Raven in this chapter.
On this hill, our fires ought to be visible as far off as the foothills of the Frostfangs. If Ben Stark is alive and free, he will come to us. I have no doubt.
Yes, said John, but what if...
He's dead? Mormont asked, not unkindly. John nodded
reluctantly.
Yeah, we say that in unison.
Dead, the Raven said. Dead.
He may come to us anyway, the old bear said. as Othor did and Jafer Flowers. I dread that as much as you, John, but we must admit the possibility.
Dead, his raven cawed, ruffing its wings. Its voice grew louder and more shrill. Dead. So the raven seems more emphatic than usual here. He's talking about the dead. If Ghost was wary of entering the circle because, hey, this is a decent spot for fighting humans, but it's a bad spot for fighting the undead, which it turns out that's the case because they surround the hill, and there's almost, they have to break out. They have to charge down the hill in dangerous nighttime fashion. Charging down the hill on a horse at night is well, it's better than just standing there and being killed by the undead, but it's very dangerous. Archmaester Renly on Flick wonders if this is Bloodraven telling us that indeed Benjen is dead, or perhaps more accurately, undead. That is what we see on the show, that he's undead, even though I feel that's a sparse telling of what we're in for in the books. The idea that Benjen is undead, I think, is not unlikely. I think they George probably at least told the showrunners that much.
But to reiterate, he's not cold hands unless George just lies to his editor, and I don't think he does.
Yeah, we know that. Again, if you aren't aware, George was asked by his editor in the margins of A Dance with Dragons, is this Benjen? When Cold Hands popped on screen, and George just wrote no, like emphatic N-O. So
no room for any questions.
Yeah, so you really have to be stretched to think.
Yeah, you have to believe that not only would he lie, but that he would lie to his editor.
Yeah, it's one thing to mislead his audience, which he really does that, and he doesn't lie to his audience, he misleads.
Yeah, exactly.
Like he doesn't want to give things away.
Yeah, he would have just been like, keep reading.
But straight up lying, no, he doesn't really do that. And this would be a even weirder lie, because like you said, it's to his editor? Why would he lie to his editor?
Yeah, so we have two mysteries because of the show combining this, because we don't know who Cold Hands is, and we don't know where Benjen is.
Yeah. So we wonder why Bloodraven, Bloodraven doesn't have perfect information, right? We have to keep that in mind. Just because he knows what's coming doesn't mean he knows when exactly or the full, all the details. For example, in this very next chapter, we have this explanation of green dreams. Well, rather, it was the last Bran chapter with the explanation of green dreams. And this next one, we have several green dreams, none of which are correctly interpreted. Now, Bloodraven's probably going to be better at it than Jojen, because he has a lot more experience. But if the source of Bloodraven's knowledge about what's going to happen on the Fist is a green dream, well, he would know that it's not perfectly accurate. Some details are maybe missing. You can't interpret prophecy perfectly. So he would have that caveat, whereas Jojen is a little more certain because he's less experienced with how wrong these prophecies can be. He doesn't have the experience of, say, Melisandre, even though Melisandre is still making those mistakes after all these years. Just a little tidbit here where Jon thinks to himself, stop acting the boy, he told himself, which is maybe a little groundwork for later when Aemon is telling him, kill the boy, let the man be born. Which also is perhaps foreshadowing for Jon literally being killed. But we'll see about that. From a patron member, Westorian Paul Berry says, after Jon's wild and late night ghost chase at the Fist, he doesn't need anyone to tell him the night is dark and full of terrors. It's a very practical example. Of course, it gets worse in the next prologue. Yeah, very true. He knows as well as anyone, yet he still goes out there and, he's drawn to whatever it is. He's interested, curious, what Ghost is leading him towards, and it's a little bit of shows his bravery. He knows what might be out there. He senses it. He's thinking about it. He still goes. So Tree Girl wants to draw our attention to this quote, which is very cool. Beautiful prose here.
The trees stood beneath him, warriors armored in bark and leaf, deployed in their silent ranks, awaiting the command to storm the hill. Black, they seemed. It was only when his torchlight brushed against them that Jon glimpsed a flash of green.
It seems like George is playing with language a little bit here, kind of making the trees into people. And
makes me think of the Children of the Forest.
Yeah, Children of the Forest and the others, and the way he plays with the colors here. He mentions bark and leaf. Warriors armored in bark and leaf, right? Yeah. Like that's the really telling line, huh? Because the so-called wood dancers were the warriors of the Children of the Forest, and that is exactly how they armored themselves.
And we have Leaf, the character.
Yeah, and deployed in their silent ranks while the children are really quiet. So are the others. And, of course, the others are getting ready to storm the hill. Well, it's their soldiers are, not so much them, but still. Very cool. And then black and green, very telling colors. Of course, they make you think of Tyrion, but not. I don't think that's relevant here. But the black and green are important nature colors, and of course they're prominent in the prologue.
Don't the others have more green than is depicted in the show?
I think so. Yeah, there's like black, white, and green are the main colors that seem to be reflect because they're the colors of they reflect the colors of nature.
Yeah.
And like that's in the very first chapter of the prologue, the way Will sees them. Okay, that's it for Jon 4, a short chapter that gave us a lot to talk about. Much mystery remains, and I can't wait to find out what happens, but it won't be soon. Bran 5, now we get into. The gang dreams about the shores of Winterfell, aka the one where Sir Rodrik should have killed Reek. Instead of the first sentence, let's go with the first 3 sentences this time.
Alebelly found him in the forge, working the bellows for Micken. Maester wants you in the turret, my lord prince. There's been a bird from the king.
All of those are dead now, and soon or soonish for Robb too.
By the way, it's really cool that Bran gets some arm exercise working the bellows.
And of course the bird. Well, maybe the bird doesn't die. The one survivor is the raven here. So this is the news that many are getting, but it has a little bit of different meaning here. And of course, it's the Battle of Oxcross. That word is spreading all over. But this time there's a personal twist, of course, the death of Sir Steveron Frey, who is Lord Walder's heir, who was a seemingly decent guy. He would not have stood for the Red Wedding, I don't think. So his death is necessary for the groundwork, because as we know, there were still a few other decent Freys, but they were all kept away from the Red Wedding because the family didn't think they would want to participate, or they might spill the beans. It would have been harder for Walder to keep his actual heir away from it. Keeping his great grandson away is a little easier. Speaking of Freys and killing each other and all that, his death is a little mysterious. It's a wound that was not thought too dangerous. It's said to him, killed him in his sleep. And killed him in his sleep, wound not too dangerous. There's always the chance of foul play in that spot. Although George tries through the dialogue to push us away from that idea, he later brings us back to it in A Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons when we get into the whole phrase line of succession business, which, of course, is set up much earlier with lines like this.
Don't be stupid, his cousin said. The sons of the first son come before the second son. Ser Ryman is next in line, and then Edwin and Black Walder and Peter Pimple, and then Aegon and all his sons.
So Ryman is Steveron's eldest son, and he's later going to be killed by the brother without banners. Edwin fears Black Walder because, he thinks he'll kill him to move up the line of succession. Black Walder is in Robb's army. And, the point there is he may have been the one to help Steveron along to move up the line of succession. So Black Walder is also the one who is not unlikely to be sleeping with his own, with Lord Walder's young wives. The reason they keep getting pregnant might be because of him, not because of Walder's 90-something-year-old business still actually works as well as he says. Lots of different evidence that Black Walder is doing this. Most of it's farther along in the story, but we here in a reread, we have the opportunity to think about it this early in the game, and it seems not unlikely. So Big Walder, of course, is more prominent at the moment, and his understanding of the succession order and all the rules of succession are very notable. Remember, we think it's not unlikely that he will get to rule the twins later, even if only for a little while. Now, he also, in laying out the succession here, he skips over 2 girls, which, because he seems to understand the succession so well, he probably did that on purpose. Meaning he's not ignorant that they come before him or some of these other people. It means he just doesn't think much of that. In other words, someone with his ambition wouldn't think of a girl as a big obstacle to him. He thinks he could get her out of the way, he could kill her off or bully her or something. That's the kind of guy he is. And he says himself, as more evidence, he says, I'll be Lord. I don't care if he is. And this is immediately harkens back to Bran's last chapter when he thinks about when there's that dream of they liked their supper more. Their meat was gray and dead or whatever, and his was bloody and the kind of meat you would want to eat. But so that Bran specifically links this to that. It's not just left for the reader to make that connection. Bran does it himself. So 3 different, at least 3 different green dreams that are in this chapter, all of which are misinterpreted. And they're close. You get close on every single one of them, and you see a variety of different misinterpretations. The sea coming to Winterfell, of course, we've joked about how that ties into the bad press, not bad press, but the bad marketing for Clash of Kings with the shores of Winterfell being mentioned, hence the title for this chapter, or our title for this chapter. But the sea coming, of course, is obviously a reference to the Ironborn coming, and it's a way to get us into the type of thinking that goes into these prophecy interpretations. So George is kind of setting us up for more prophecies that people are going to misinterpret, like Melisandre. Well, in some cases, Melisandre's have already been laid out. We just haven't seen them play out. But there's, of course, more to come from her and from other characters. And, of course, the faces being flayed. They see Jojen has the dream of Reek, but it's actually Ramsay, as we know, but they don't. So you can see how, even though he has this dream, which is true, he gets some very key details wrong. He thinks it's Reek. He thinks it's the Bran and Rickon, but it's not Bran and Rickon. It's the Miller's kids. So, very interesting, too, is Jojen calling Bran Warg and being very, as he tends to be, blunt with Bran and saying, look, man, you got to accept who you are. He's, he's little grandfather after all, right? So the word warg is first mentioned amongst rumors Arya hears about Tywin and Harrenhal, and that's part of this general pastiche of rumors that different people repeat about Oxcross, whether it's Lancel mentioning wargs, Arya hearing people at Harrenhal talk about them, whether it's Jojen here. There's just it comes to us from a variety of sources. But the idea is pretty straightforward, that people are going to be scared of him because he's a warg. And that's reflected in the rumors of Robb and how his army of wargs, or he fed the heart of Sir Stafford Lannister to his warg. Just crazy, savage nonsense that we know is completely untrue, but like Tyrion says, is partially based on people not wanting to admit their own failures. The sauce of sorcery is the sauce of failure that they use to hide the taste of failure. Yeah, I didn't say that very well, but you get the point. And it's interesting, too, because we learn that Old Nan, who is a bit of an oracle for how things are and what people believe and the truth of certain supernatural things, Bran recalls that every single story Old Nan tells him about wargs are, the warg is evil. The warg is a bad guy every single time. And I also, guy is usually accurate too. It's almost always, there are some certainly female skin changers in Westeros history, but it's usually a dude. Varamir is, of course, the most prominent example of skin changers who aren't a Stark. And he's definitely evil. He's pretty awful. You get an idea of what a warg king would be like, sending his beasts into different villages to just claim women and kill anyone who gets in his way. That's maybe why everyone hates wargs for the most part, but it doesn't necessarily explain why the wildlings are okay with them. Someone like Ygritte says, yeah, we're cool with skin changers. So how did that division in northern culture and wildling culture happen? I don't think it's just because of the wall, because it seems like the North has hated skin changers for a longer time than that. But maybe it is just they grew apart like that. But it's a peculiar little difference in cultures there. One thing that the North and the wildlings don't have in common, among so many things that they do have in common in terms of beliefs and culture. Obviously, in terms of day-to-day life, there's lots of differences there too, but we're talking about their shared cultural heritage. So it's almost like Jojen gave us all a lesson on the basics of green dreams last time, but this more advanced lesson is beyond even him, because we're all learning this together. And it shows us that, yeah, Jojen's got this confidence and certainty, and he's going to be right about Green Dreams as a whole. But like I said before, he lacks experience with the different ways he can be wrong. Even though he knows he can be wrong, he doesn't know all the different shapes and forms that those mistakes can take. That's something he seems to be learning as he goes, and we'll see how that continues to build. It's like, so it's even more of the Jojen Mel parallels, but we're also getting close to the House of the Undying, where we're going to have more examples of prophecies that can easily be misinterpreted, not just by the characters, but by us, the readers, and the fandom. So, well, let's do another quote here.
In the days that followed, he tried to warn others about what Jojen had seen, but it didn't go as he wanted. Mikken thought it was funny.
The sea, is it? Happens I always wanted to see the sea. Never got where I could go to it, though. So now it's coming to me, is it? The gods are good to take such trouble for a poor smith. So Mikken, the man who made Needle, among other things, argues and curses repeatedly and is eventually speared by Ironborn Stig. So, yeah, not exactly what he had in mind. Now, here's another one mentioned, Septon Shale, quote,
"The gods will take me when they see fit," Septon Shale said quietly. "Though I scarcely think it likely that I'll drown, Bran. I grew up on the banks of the White Knife, you know. I'm quite the strong swimmer."
Well, Theon has Septon Shale thrown in a well. Swimming won't avail you in that spot, so rough. And finally, we have Alebelly.
Alebelly was the only one who paid the warning any heed. He went to talk to Jojen himself, and afterward stopped bathing and refused to go near the well. Finally, he stank so bad that 6 of the other guards threw him into a tub of scalding water and scrubbed him raw, while he screamed that they were going to drown him like the frog boy had said. Thereafter, he scowled whenever he saw Bran or Jojen about the castle, and muttered under his breath.
So he's the first to die when the Ironborn come over the walls at night. And though it wasn't his actions that led to his death, it's surely no accident that George R. R. Martin wrote the man who believed the prophecy as the first one to die when the Ironborn snuck over the walls. So Rodrik asked Jojen if he saw the sea coming for him, and it gives Bran pause because he did not, nor did he see it for Luwin. But that's, of course, because those two are killed by Reek. Actually, Ramsay, of course, but never mind that for now. Jojen, of course, also sees Reek flaying Bran and Rickon, and of course we know that's the proxy children from the mill, and it's difficult to catch, by the way, because, Jojen sees Reek flaying someone as a hint that he's Ramsay. And, first time through, you're reading this, you're not going to catch that. That's a reread intended catch. Jojen caps it off with this quote.
"I couldn't see why, but I saw the end of it. I saw you and Rickon in your crypts, down in the dark with all the dead kings and their stone wolves."
So he thinks he's seeing them dead, but this is not their final resting place. It's hiding in the crypts during the sack. Very straightforward, but again, it's a good example of Jojen having this certainty, but being completely wrong, yet there being quite a grain of truth in that wrongness. Now, Luwin was so close, right? He almost figured it out. It's right here, but oh well. Quote,
"The Reed boy believes he sees the future in his dreams. Sir Rodrik, I've spoken to Bran about the uncertainty of such prophecies. But if truth be told, there is trouble along the stony shore, raiders in longships plundering fishing villages." I guess Luwin's not so skeptical, huh?
Yeah, I mean, he nailed it. That is exactly what the sea is coming to Winterfell means. And that's Theon. That's not just any raiders. We know that, that's exactly who it is. And here's a little bit of Jojen and Bran, Mira arguing a little bit. "The things I see in Green Dreams can't be changed."
That made his sister angry. Why would the gods send a warning if we can't heed it and change what's to come?
"I don't know,"
Jojen said sadly.
So, of course, there's a lot of third eye talking in this one. Bran thinking about opening his third eye, not quite understanding what that means, having more of a childlike attitude towards it, being his age that he is. But he's going to open it down in the darkness eventually. When he's down in the crypts, that's when he's going to start to level up, so to speak, in his abilities, and that's when he's going to speak to Jon. And I think it's Jon 7 when Jon is beyond the wall and starts to have major notes or major skin changer dreams right along in line with what we're getting set up here with Bran. Robb taking Ashmark. Remember we mentioned at the beginning of the episode in the intro period that George likes to drop little tidbits here and here when he's introducing characters. He can spread that out across a couple of POVs, like drop part of the explanation here, part of the explanation there. Joe wants us to think about this a little more because the Marbrands are one of the most important houses in the Westerlands, and it's just casually mentioned that Robb has taken Ashmark. And he suggests maybe it's the Craycalls are secondary. It used to be House Rain, of course. They used to be the second most prominent, but they're by this point 40 years extinct. So that's a pretty big deal. Just shows how successful Robb is being in the West. It's also showing the huge flaw in Tywin's plan, because Tywin everybody thought, oh, what a great plan. And when I say everybody, I mean his sub-commanders and Kevin. They thought it was a good plan for him to just camp at Harrenhal and sit there, eat all the food while everyone else starves, and Robb slowly loses men. Well, did he really not think it possible that Robb would head west? I mean, there was nothing stopping him from doing that. So I don't know why. He seems like another blind spot in Tywin's overview of the strategy here. But it's not. I'm not saying it was stupid, but when they in that scene when they're talking about all the possibilities, this doesn't come up. They never think of, well, maybe Robb will attack west. Anyway, Jojen's saying he doesn't know why the gods would send dreams they can't change. Joe calls that a real bummer. Gets at the theme of this book, though. Humans vying against magical and supernatural. That's a big part of this book that's less a part of Game of Thrones, less a part of A Storm of Swords. And it might be the most prominent in this book of all of them because the concepts are explained and introduced more so than they are elsewhere. I mean, green dreams are probably more prominent in this book than they are elsewhere. The others, don't appear in this book directly, but there's so much about them. We get the Dragonglass cache. We get, the Night's Watch going so far north. We get all this stuff about prophecy. We get the introduction of Melisandre, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of the one where the old powers awaken in a way that the characters are aware of it. In Game of Thrones, we have old powers awakening and hardly anyone knows. And of course, then we have things like, Dany's dragons also. That's the supernatural aspect of the fire in a fire and ice is stronger on her side there. And it's kind of taken a jaunt through ancient times here in this book. But no Dany chapter today, but it's the first chapter next week. So more about that when we get there. So Joe also points out how endearing it is that Rodrik, endearing/tragic, that Rodrik doesn't just deny the prophecy. He speaks to Bran in his own language. He says, did you see me dead in the dreams? Or did Jojen see me dead? And he's like, oh, good, he didn't. So I'm okay then. And that's really, that's a way to make us like Rodrik more, which is a way to make us be sadder when he dies. And of course, it's mentioned too that of all the people that had to find Danella Hornwood in her awful, tragic state, it had to be Sir Rodrik, the one that was having a little bit of a connection with her. George, meanie. Some random thoughts here about this chapter and some questions from y'all. It struck me that Melisandre and Jojen are a bit like Dan and Dave, the showrunners, because it's like the gods told them exactly what was going to happen. And they had utter certainty about those visions that they received, but they misinterpreted what they were told. So, of course, in this case, Melisandre and Jojen are getting their information from the gods in the story. And Dan and Dave got their information from the god of the story, George R. R. Martin. Anyway, Paul Berry with a great comment. I hadn't realized before, but despite Lewin's skepticism, he actually interprets Jojen's green dream correctly when he mentions Raiders on the Stony Shore. Exactly what we were saying. He's so close. He doesn't quite get it. He almost realized, I was like, wait, that prophecy is accurate. Oh. Interesting mention of the ice dragon, the blue star in the rider's eye, it says. And it's yet another reference to blue stars as a reference to or an indication of the others. or the undead. And again, Cold Hands and the other non-othery whites don't have the blue eyes. Cold Hands does not have blue eyes. So Benjen probably won't either if the show is even close to the same kind of ending we'll get for him.
I think we need to come up with names for constellations in A Song of Ice and Fire. You know, there's the Ice Dragon. There's the Dire Wolf.
the golden lion in the sky.
Yeah, whatever they would call their constellations. I don't know.
The great fat aurochs. Interestingly, too, Bran asks Osha if she's seen the White Walkers, and she kind of dodges the question. She's like, "Why do you ask?" And so we don't really know. Also, interestingly, I forget if it's mentioned in this chapter or later. I think it's this chapter. Maybe it's the next one. It doesn't matter. Bran notices that Osha is stronger than Alebelly, which is interesting. I don't know. I have nothing particular to say about that, but Osha's pretty tough.
Alebelly drinks too much ale.
You got to be strong to haul a belly around like that all the time. So you took note of this quote here as well. I believe this was you who grabbed this one.
Yeah, I just thought it was whatever. There's different kinds, he said slowly. There's the wolf dreams. Those aren't so bad as the others. I run and hunt and kill squirrels. And there's dreams where the crow comes and tells me to fly. Sometimes the tree is in those dreams too, calling my name. That frightens me. But the worst dreams are when I fall. He looked down into the yard, feeling miserable. I never used to fall before. When I climbed, I went every place, up on the roofs and along the walls. I used to feed the crows in the burned tower. Mother was afraid that I would fall, but I knew I never would. Only I did. And now when I sleep, I fall all the time.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, I mean, we hear about, the wolf dreams and, the crow dreams and the tree dreams, but it's interesting. We also learn about green dreams elsewhere, but not here.
Yeah, there's more of an explanation for some of the types of dreams than others. That's true because of who has them, and I guess partly George wants to keep some of it maybe secret till later, but who knows?
And I guess the falling dreams, I think just the falling, that's just trauma.
That's just trauma. You're right. Yeah, it's wrapped up in the supernatural because these coma dreams involved him falling, so they kind of get married a bit. But I agree, that's mostly rooted in just straight up trauma. It's only the supernatural elements that add on to it make it seem more supernatural. But yeah, really, he would be having falling dreams if he had nothing supernatural in his arc at all, I think.
Oh, by the way, Nina grabbed the actual names for some of the constellations.
Oh, cool.
Can I share them?
Yeah, do it.
Okay, from John 3, A Storm of Swords. Maester Luwin had taught him his stars as a boy in Winterfell. He had learned the names of the 12 houses of heaven and the rulers of each. Okay, 12 houses. He could find the 7 wanderers sacred to the faith. He was old friends with the Ice Dragon, the Shadow Cat, the Moon Maid, and the Sword of the Morning. All those he shared with Ygritte, but not some of the others. We look up at the same stars and see such different things. The king's crown was the cradle, to hear her tell it. The stallion was the horned lord. The red wanderer that Septons preached was sacred to their smith up there was called the thief.
Oh.
Anyways, that is very interesting, actually. I did not take note of that quote. We'll talk about it more when we get to A Storm of Swords, I suppose.
Well, thanks for that, Nina. Really cool.
Yeah.
I love to look at the bits of world building like that. Always fun and very relevant because that stuff isn't just window dressing in this setting. George loves to connect the dots. Sometimes the dots haven't yet been connected, but we know that
or the stars.
The stars in this case, they look like dots from a distance. So there was a nice discussion on Flick about whether Bloodraven was sending the green dreams to Jojen in the first place. Now, there's some evidence of this because of one of his dreams was of the winged wolf and the stone chains, and how Howland Reed, when he heard of those dreams from his son, he specifically sent Jojen to Winterfell to interact with Bran. So there's definitely things yet to be resolved about this. There's definitely things Howland Reed knew that we want to know. And I do think it's possible. After all, Bloodraven almost certainly sent the direwolf, the mother direwolf in the first place. He has certainly interacted with Bran's dreams, so it's certainly not a stretch that he would have sent these dreams, especially because Jojen says he's seen the three-eyed crow in his dreams since he was young. So, yes, it's always possible that any of the green dreams Bran is having are partly a result of Bloodraven sending them, but I have to think that some of them are independent of Bloodraven. I can't imagine that all of them are coming from him. That's a bit much for me. But the fact that the presence of the three-eyed crow in those dreams means that he's definitely a part of them, at least a little bit, if not a lot. And that gets into what we were saying before. If Bloodraven is having these green dreams himself and then kind of passing them on, or if he's having his own green dreams, he's just as vulnerable to getting them wrong. As maybe less vulnerable, but still very vulnerable to getting them wrong and misinterpreting them. Who knows where that's going to lead. He could mislead Bran, not with intent, but by accident, because he doesn't even understand, despite his much greater wisdom. We wonder, too, why Rodrik and Luwin's fates weren't seen in the green dreams. Yes, I mean, he saw so many other things were seen. Why not that? And of course, Jojen had been having these green dreams about the sea coming to Winterfell since before he had even gotten there. He's been having those dreams for a while. So there has been opportunity for him to have dreams about Rodrik and Luwin, but he didn't. I don't know why he didn't. But I do have some more thoughts on the way they die when that comes. So that's not long away, so we'll talk about that when we get there. For now, let's move on. It is Tyrion 8. The gang wants Renly's leavings, a.k.a. the Purple Wedding pre-planning party. It starts off with this line.
Varys stood over the brazier, warming his soft hands.
His soft hands. Soft but bloody.
There's cold hands and there's soft hands.
That's true. So Varys is also the first one to really talk a lot in this chapter. And let's start with that. This line is not really an exaggeration here.
It would appear Renly was murdered most fearfully in the midst of his army. His throat was opened from ear to ear by a blade that passed through steel and bone as if they were soft cheese.
Yeah, that's not really an exaggeration. Loras is later going to test the steel out with a sharpened long axe and be like, I could hardly cut it, and it, just sitting there hammering it on the ground, like with that, it's not being worn or moving. And it was the finest steel. So the supernatural element here is really powerful in the literal sense, meaning it cut through steel and bone as if it was soft cheese. And of course, it's not just the supernatural element here; it's the logistical element. Most of Renly's men going over to Stannis. Most importantly, the Florents, who are already somewhat tied to Stannis. They had a natural connection there, seeing as how Stannis is married to a Florent. And look at this list. This is actually Davos 2 that this quote comes from, but it's so relevant here, so let's jump to it.
This is a notable company. The great lords Estermont, Errol, and Varner, Ser John of the Green Apple Fossaways, and Ser Brian of the Red, Lord Caron and Ser Gaiard of King Renly's Rainbow Guard, and the puissant Lord Alistair Florent of Brightwater, to be sure. Is that your onion knight I spy to the rear?
It is. Now, that's Sir Courtney Penrose speaking, and of course it's really important who appears in that scene. But as we've been preaching quite a lot, particularly on this reread, is it's not just what's there that matters, it's what's not there that matters. And in that scene, it's made very clear he is the last of House Baratheon, Robert's heir, and Renly's.
If that is so, why is the Knight of Flowers not among you? And where is Mathis Rowan, Randall Tarley, Lady Oakhart? Why are they not here in your company, they who loved Renly best? Where is Brienne of Tarth, I ask you?
Right? To win that, it's very telling. The people who wanted, who loved Renly the most are not there. And Sir Courtney can't help but point to that. He's like, okay, the actual biggest fans of Renly aren't here. What I see is a bunch of ambitious types. So that's, for him, that's a big deal, and it gives him pause. So to win that group, minus Brienne, of course, the Joffrey-Marjorie marriage is suggested. And from Tyrion's point of view, It's perfect. He says, I believe the phrase he uses, he can taste it, how perfect it is. And you can see why. It is a great fit for them. It brings this large, threatening army to their side. Now, the problem there is the Tyrells are snakes to have as allies. Not that the Lannisters are great to have as allies either, of course. I'm not defending them. But this is kind of a marriage made in hell. But Tyrion is sort of blind to the perils here. Now, to be fair, it's having the Tyrells as enemies is definitely worse than having them as friends. But having them as friends does come with a lot of problems. It's interesting how Cersei is kind of correct here. She's wary of all this. And, of course, she's going to be far more wary later and far more paranoid about it later as the Tyrells encroach more and more and get closer and closer to the throne and the center of power. As we know, Cersei and the Tyrells is going to be quite a thing later. And this is the beginning of it. This is where it starts. Littlefinger sniffs this all out. He can see that the Tyrells are the biggest other power in the realm right now, and bringing them in is a huge stroke. What if he probably imagines that if the Lannisters and Tyrells are together, they're going to be really hard to defeat. And if he is the one that brings them together, if he's responsible for this alliance, it's huge for him personally in his career and gives him a lot of leeway to do the kind of things he likes to do, which is he gets away with things because he's so good at what he does, right? That's a big part of what Tyrion notes about him. It's like, if there's ever a man who armored himself in gold, it's Littlefinger. It's Peter Baelish, who has made himself so valuable that he can get away with things. Well, this is exactly in line with that. Littlefinger sees an opportunity to do something really big that puts him in that puts two huge, powerful houses in his debt. They owe him for this. And of course, what does he do? Comes back and asks for the thing that Tyrion promised him that wasn't really promised him, meaning Harrenhal and overlordship of the Riverlands, which he had to salivate like that big time when he heard that offer. The idea of Littlefinger, who wants to be worthy of Catelyn Stark, who never was accepted by the nobility as a boy and has been getting his revenge on the nobility ever since. The idea that he could be made to be put over the house that started all this long psychological trip for him is just too much for him to not want. So once that was pulled away from him by Tyrion, he's determined to see it through, to make it real, even though it was probably never genuinely offered in the first place. So this is where he can taste how perfect it is, really falls apart, because Littlefinger's plan here, and with the connivance of Olenna Tyrell, this is where the Purple Wedding originates from. This is where the seeds are planted. This is also probably where the trick of Garland wearing Renly's armor comes up. This is something maybe that, who knows when Littlefinger has that idea, but he suggests it to the Tyrells when they're all meeting, discussing this alliance. Littlefinger and the Tyrells have quite a lot of goals that align or overlap. And when Tyrion is sitting here frantically thinking, what's his angle here? What's his angle here? Well, the reward is a big part of it, something Tyrion maybe could have figured out. But the part he couldn't figure out is perhaps this thing, which is how much of the Tyrells' goals overlap with Littlefinger's. And that, of course, is hard for Tyrion to see because people don't know what Littlefinger's goals are. It's Littlefinger? I said Littlefinger. Littlefinger's goals aren't super clear at this point. They aren't clear for quite a while, even. But at this point, it seems like he just wants to amass power and that he's, in love with Catelyn. But beyond that, the rest it's still kind of hazy. So this comes up a lot, which is in Tyrion's chapters, which is the killing of Joffrey to rule through Tommen. A lot of people from Bran on up have noticed this. And the problem with that strategy of killing Joffrey to rule through Tommen is that it's an easily spotted strategy. Any other power player, any other Game of Thrones type person, someone who's thinking about these sort of things, is going to notice that. They're going to be like, Tommen's tractable. Ruling through Tom, he could be a puppet ruler for somebody. That's just, anyone in the business of politics is going to notice that. And that's the problem with it. it's kind of obvious.
I mean, it also makes it so that it's hard to pin it on someone.
That's true, because there's so many different people that would want to do this.
And you would think that people that are manipulative and able to do that would realize that, hey, I can obscure this because people have a reason, which is exactly what we see happen. They're like, hey, Tyrion has reason to want to do this.
It's really interesting as Cersei is painted so often as paranoid and confused when she's proven right about a lot of them. A lot of them she's not. A lot of them she's dead wrong and shoots herself in the foot. But this is an interesting example of how she was right to not want to get too close to the Tyrells. They murdered her son.
Yeah. She is confused, but she's not so paranoid.
Right. It's that I'm reminded of the Nirvana line. Just because they're paranoid just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you.
Yes.
And they are indeed after her and her family and her son. And yeah, they want the throne, as much of it as they can have, through the Lannisters. So it's pretty bad from that perspective. Sansa's also a wild card here. The Tyrells wanted her, and so does Littlefinger. So you wonder whether she was discussed when Littlefinger and Olenna Tyrell are doing all this scheming about how they can handle this marriage and all the other subplots that go with it. Subplot having multiple meanings there as a literary theme and as a these guys are plotting.
That's a question I have. Do you think when Littlefinger talked to the Tyrells there that it was at all floated the idea that, hey, we could take care of Joffrey if you're concerned, or do you think that was much later?
No, I think that was right away.
Right away.
Because and here's one of the pieces of evidence for it is that how early on Sansa gets the hairnet. Sansa gets the hairnet really soon here. I forget exactly when, but Dantos gives it to her really soon.
Okay.
After Littlefinger returns.
Yeah, he returns.
So that means it's all planned out.
Okay.
That means they've plotted to throw Tyrion and Sansa under the bus. They've planned it to the point where they know who they're going to blame it on. So that's why it's the Purple Wedding pre-planning party, because it looks like they did all the details during this meeting. I think they took care of it all. And now there may have been a little double crossing there, because I don't think that the Tyrells agreed to let Sansa run off with Littlefinger, because as we know, they tried to,
they
steal her away.
Yeah, they wanted her.
So I think that's maybe Littlefinger double crossed the Tyrells there on that front, but on the Joffrey murdering part, that part went through. So I think that may have been Littlefinger's major part of the plan here, was the chaos and the reward of Harrenhal for himself. So I wonder, I think maybe Tyrion could have figured that out, but, he didn't. So here's a weird point. This is not weird, and it's just, why would Tyrion think this would work? I guess it's just society. Maybe Tyrion thinks that setting Joff up with a sex worker is going to calm him down. Like, why would that work? But it is also shown on the show, and it's even more violent. It doesn't actually happen in the books. Tyrion doesn't actually ever set up Joff with a sex worker. He just thinks he's going to, and then it doesn't happen. In the show, he does set them up, and of course, Joffrey kills the sex worker. And so I guess the point is that that's not his issue. It's not that he's not getting laid. Joff's problems run a lot deeper than that. So Tyrion being wary, and this all relates to the end bit here, Tyrion not liking or being wary of Cersei's sudden affection, her sudden, lack of paranoia, because Tyrion thinks to himself, well, if she's not paranoid, that means something's going well for her. And if something's going well for her, and I don't know what it is, then it might involve getting over on me. And he's right. He doesn't know what the thing is. And it doesn't come up. It's kind of interesting. It doesn't come up for several more chapters. And it's that she's found Alayaya and thinks that gives her leverage over Tyrion, which it does, but not in the way she thinks it does. And well, that's, we'll talk about more when we actually get to that. But I think it's interesting how it speaks to what Cersei thinks she's doing to Tyrion, which is that I think that this is evidence that Littlefinger is the one who sent Mandon Moore after Tyrion and not Cersei. Because if Cersei was plotting to kill Tyrion, why does she need to bother with taking this hostage? right? Whereas Littlefinger has distinct reasons for wanting to kill Tyrion, which is A, he's been digging into the finances, which if he gets far enough, he's going to figure out some of Littlefinger's game and figure out some of his double dealing. 2, Littlefinger doesn't like Tyrion because of lying to him about Harrenhal and all that stuff. And 3, well, he recognizes Tyrion as someone intelligent that's willing to work against him, whereas most of the court seems to just be content to let Littlefinger do his thing. And so he might see Tyrion as an obstacle that needs to be removed in ways that other characters don't seem to be. So, all right. Joe wonders what it would be like if we had the Cersei point of view here. And that's really interesting because there would be a lot of more paranoid, and we could get into the someone younger, someone more beautiful trying to overthrow her, getting into the Valonqar theory, which is neat because that would be going on here. The idea of her not wanting Joffrey to set aside Sansa as maybe part of that. Because if from Cersei's point of view, if Sansa marries Joffrey, well, then she's maybe more under her control, more under her thumb, and she has more say in Sansa's future. But if Sansa goes off and marries somebody else, then that means that she's got less control over the situation, and it maybe enables the Valonqar prophecy to come true. Now, as we know from the Green Dreams stuff and the prophecies in general, you can't stop them from coming true. Cersei doesn't know that, but she's worried about it, paranoid about it, and thinks about it constantly. But we don't know that until the Feast for Crows. So, here's another interesting point that Joe brings up that I hadn't thought about. Quote, "You think so?" asked Tyrion. "He's 13, Cersei, the same age at which I married."
You shamed us all with that sorry episode. Joffrey is made of finer stuff.
As an aside, Joffrey is not made of finer stuff, but it's funny that she thinks he is, and that she thinks that 13-year-old boy isn't interested in sex. I mean, come on.
Her and Jamie were messing around.
I know. That's some serious denial right there.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what age they started with things, but it's probably a lot younger.
But, yeah, probably a lot younger. But it's kind of surprising that Tyrion would bring up Tysha here, because, he knows Cersei's going to just shut him down and say something embarrassing, because everyone in their family was embarrassed by that, even though it's sad and tragic, and we know that there's a lot more to it. Cersei and Tywin, they believe what Tyrion believes, that it was all a setup by Jaime. So, yeah, it's a little weird that he would bring that up, because he knows that Cersei's just going to jump all over that and insult him. Joe also points out the line, marriage contracts can be broken, and that's handy to bring up after discussion of Lady Hornwood and whether or not her marriage contract was valid, as is being discussed by Sir Rodrik and Lewin. She signed the marriage contract saying that Ramsay was her heir, but Lewin says that laws, contracts signed at sword point aren't valid, but, it's not so simple just to overturn that either. So, we shall see. And now here's another telling line from that Joe caught that I think is really good.
No, not that one. Which
but
one?
regardless,
there's still much to be said for a Tyrell marriage. It may be the only way that Joffrey lives long enough to reach his wedding night.
Yeah, well, he lived not quite to his wedding night. He got to his wedding day, his wedding afternoon. He was so close to his wedding night. Not quite. So, getting a little bit back into the news about Stannis and Storm's End, here's a little bit of closure, sort of.
He demands to see the mortal remains before he opens his gates, but it seems that Renly's corpse has unaccountably vanished. Carried away, most likely.
Right, and that's, of course, he is Sir Courtney Penrose. He refuses to admit. He's like, I need proof that Renly's dead. And we find out where Renly's body went in Jaime VII, A Storm of Swords. This is Loras talking.
I buried him with mine own hands in a place he showed me once when I was a squire at Storm's End. No one shall ever find him there to disturb his rest. He looked at Jaime defiantly. I will defend King Tommen with all my strength, I swear it. I will give my life for his if need be, but I will never betray Renly. I will never betray Renly by word or deed. He was the king that should have been. He was the best of them. The best dressed, perhaps, Jaime thought, but for once he did not say it.
Yeah, see, that's what we have to look forward to with Jaime point of view, is the great Lannister sarcasm that we get from the outside, from Cersei and Jaime and Tywin, that we get, his inner monologue really adds a lot more humor to it. So I like that. So it's interesting here that though Cersei is right about to be wary of the Tyrells, she's still thinking in terms of power and pride before strategy. So yes, she's not keen on Joff's setting Sansa aside. She's not excited about this Lannister Tyrell marriage because she says Joffrey won't accept her and all that stuff. But she's not thinking about how valuable the alliance could be in terms of not having the Tyrells as enemies, which is huge. Now, of course, throughout this discussion, it's not well known by the council, it's well known by us that Littlefinger is into Sansa. And so the idea of Joff setting aside Sansa, he's like, yeah, yeah, definitely. He would absolutely push that if he needed to. He didn't really need to push it, though, because...
He's like, yeah, she is too young. She is too young.
She's too young. It's
for you,
it's inappropriate.
Joffrey. Yeah, it's inappropriate.
And of course, Cersei thinks of pride when she says that, yeah, well, this line.
My son is too young to care about such things.
Oh, not that line. I'm sorry.
Say what you will, my lords, but Joffrey is too proud to settle for Renly's leaving.
I mean, that line you quoted is pretty much in line with this, though. The point being that she's thinking of Joff's pride, too, when she's thinking of herself. She's thinking that's the angle that matters to her.
And as well, that she's deciding for Joffrey, not Joffrey deciding, I'll take Renly's leavings, or I'm not too young.
Yeah. And that kind of wraps up in her thinking of maybe who his father is. Because as Jaime points out, not long from now, I guess it's the end of the book, he says that, in my own way, I'm more loyal, to Cersei than even Ned was to you. Now, of course, he doesn't know that Ned didn't actually ever cheat on Catelyn, most likely. But point being, that might be what Cersei's thinking of here, which is that Jaime is loyal to her, and so she thinks that Joffrey would also have that personality trait, which is, she's wrong, but that might be what she's thinking.
I mean, also, Cersei herself should, maybe thinks in retrospect she should have been too proud to settle for Lyanna's leavings.
That is also true. Very good point. And this is what I said at the beginning of the episode, right? Like, the pride themes here are really strong. The decision-making of so many of these characters is, number one is their pride. That's the thing that matters most. Everything else, like other things matter to them, but if they were to rank them, pride is like number one for so many of these characters. Here's a line that gives us a bit of pause.
I was not unmuted. Candlelight gleamed green as wildfire in Cersei's eyes.
Again, we don't think she'll blow up the Sept, but she does burn down the Tower of the Hand, so this is, with wildfire, and so...
The substance.
And so maybe something else is coming. Maybe Cersei does have some sort of wildfire thing in her future, but, or maybe it's just showing, maybe it's just the way George is writing this is just to show how intense her thinking is. Interesting, too. Stefan B points out that Tyrion and Cersei's pride and arguing over and power games here are funny, or not funny, but ironic in that they both volunteer the other to go do this, to go arrange this marriage alliance, whereas Tyrion probably would have done a pretty good job. Cersei's not wrong that Tyrion would have done a good job with the arrangements, but when Tyrion's like, no, you should be the one to go, you should make the marriage arrangements, that's actually a terrible idea. Cersei would be horrible in those negotiations. As we see, she does not handle the Tyrells very well. She's all prickly and paranoid, and those negotiations wouldn't have been good to have her lead those. You want someone with more of a negotiator personality, someone who's a little smoother and less insulting and doesn't have a stick up her butt. So Yeah, so that's actually kind of funny that Tyrion is making a suggestion that would actually sabotage their efforts. This is like, if you really want the Tyrells to join up with you, don't send Cersei to negotiate. So I think he was just caught up in the moment there. But if you were really to think about it, he'd be like, actually, that.
I mean, it's a threat to Cersei as well.
It is, but it's also a bad idea.
It's a bad idea. But with her being like, oh damn, like I might have to go. And so then she's like, oh, okay, we should find a solution then.
Yeah. And so she's trying to like, throw out a better idea or something, or better for her anyway.
Yeah,
and,
she does not want to leave the seat of power where she has influence over Joffrey.
And of course, as we see, she does not. She is the only time in the entire series that she's not at King's Landing is in the very few chapters, which she's in Winterfell. And she is then planted in place. She is the most... unmoving of the point of views.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously in the show she never that continues. She dies there,
yeah.
But in the books, we've long been thinking that she'd go to Casterly Rock.
I think she goes to Casterly Rock, Queen in the West.
I still think she will. I do still think that, but obviously the show has to give you some doubt, some pause, a little bit, but I'm not much.
Queen in the West also gives her the opportunity to be involved with Euron in some way, which would also get to the loose idea the show presented with Euron and Cersei having some sort of connection. I know a lot of people are against the idea that Euron and Cersei will ever hook up or matter as a pairing in the books, but I think there's room for it for sure.
I agree.
So Tree Girl suggests that Tyrion probably should have been willing to go, and it's an interesting question whether he should have or not. Because certainly allowing Littlefinger to make these arrangements didn't go very well, and maybe Tyrion should have figured that out or at least been concerned. He didn't even occur to him. He's certainly concerned because he doesn't know what Littlefinger's angle is. He's like, oh God, he knows there's something that Littlefinger sees here, and that's bad for me because there's nothing that Littlefinger wants that's good for me. So but he doesn't get much farther than that with the idea. So I kind of wonder about that. But it's true that I think Tyrion would have done a good job. But on the other hand, Cersei does do a lot of undermining of Tyrion when he's not around. So one can only imagine what she would have done if he had actually left the city. Because as soon as he's in his bed and injured, all sorts of things start to happen around him. After the Battle of Blackwater, he loses a lot of the ground that he had made up while he was, able to walk around and do things. So Stefan B. also wonders... what happened to the infantry whose lords went over to Stannis? Well, it's interesting. A lot of them are still in the Tyrell army. Most of them, in fact. But a lot of them... Well, I'm answering this incorrectly. He said, what happened to the infantry whose lords went over to Stannis? The ones who stayed with the Tyrells, of course, those are the ones I just mentioned. The ones who went over to Stannis, a lot of them were killed. Randall Tarley is mentioned to have put a lot of men to the sword at Bitterbridge. So presumably it would be those ones. The ones whose lords had... rushed ahead to Storm's End to break the siege and then flipped when Renly was killed. So their infantry was kind of like, well, what are we supposed to do? And the Tyrells and Randall Tarley are like, well, we're not going to let you have the chance to join up with your lords. We're going to kill you now. So a lot of them were killed. A few of them were imprisoned. And probably some others were forcibly conscripted. And there was a lot of men. We're talking about 60,000-ish. But we're not sure how many of them were killed and how many of them actually joined the Tyrell army. But a lot of them are going to be probably seen on the field in the future. Maybe a raid against the Golden Company and perhaps later against Daenerys. So a lot of these guys are still in the field. Funny audiobook error when Tyrion is saying, he says Cersei kissing him was unanticipated. It's actually, Roy Dotrice says, it was... anticipated. So it's like I knew she was gonna kiss me. I was like, what? Super chat from Steven Stark. Shea is the best it is known. Thank you, Steven. Be talking to you shortly on I Know That Nerd right after this episode. And that does it for Tyrion 8. And now Theon 3, the gang hunts wild hares, a.k.a. the one with Theon's big plan. First line is...
Theon wiped the spittle off his cheek with the back of his hand. Ugh.
Yeah, right? It's kind of like the Aeron blowing a snot rocket at Euron when he's making him drink.
Oh, those Ironborn.
They're so gross, right? Theon had no qualms with the ambush. Indeed, this is the first battle he ever fought was the Whispering Wood, and that was an ambush on greater scale. Nor does he have qualms killing his own man for disobedience. But he had no stomach for executing a prisoner via drowning, and he doesn't really even like reaving. Quote,
Theon had planned that attack as well, bringing his ships up to the shore in the chill darkness before the dawn and leaping from the prow with a long axe in his hand to lead his men into the sleeping village. He did not like the taste of any of this, but what choice did he have?
you could have stuck with Robb. That's one thing you could have done. I mean, you did have some choice.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I mean, to be clear, one of the things that, I mean, you might be like, oh, he's fighting and he's fought otherwise. They're attacking a sleeping village here.
That's brutal. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? Yeah. I wonder why you don't like it, Theon. Because it's evil. And because perhaps more relevantly, because Theon doesn't really think in terms of good or evil, it's the influence of Ned Stark, the guy who had as much a hand in raising him as his own culture. Probably more a hand because it's more recent, more of his more recent formative years anyway.
Yeah, Theon knows deep down you should face someone. You should not get them behind their back, basically.
Yeah, like he's okay with ambush because that seems to be okay in war,
Yeah.
but ambushing sleeping non-combatants
Yeah, non-combatants.
that's different,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, because like at least Benford Tallheart and them, they were coming for a fight. They were unprepared, they were sloppy, but they were warriors, and they
Yeah.
were trying to fight. So Theon's okay with that, but he just thinking of pulling rings off of a dead body, he's like, I don't want to do that. It's just all the aspects of war that Ned would have been okay with. Again, executing a guy who disobeyed him. That's okay. Ned would do the same. Maybe not in that manner. He wouldn't just shoot him in with a bow and arrow like randomly. He would do it more with the show of justice and like bring people together and tell them why this guy's being executed. Say how important it is to you got to obey your lords. Blah blah blah. But it's at least a similar concept. You can at least see the seed of where that came from. But he just can't do the parts of this that are Ironborn. It's a constant theme of bile and bitterness. It's rooted in taste and stomach. Like he's queasy.
You know how there's fire and blood? Is the next one going to be bile and bitterness?
Yeah, exactly. He says so often when George is showing him, is expressing Theon's reaction to these things, it's done as a matter of taste or stomach. He gets sick to his stomach. He continues to refuse ale, and the Ironborn are constantly drinking ale. He even thinks of how drinking ale to get drunk before battle is a thing that used to happen in old times. The men at Moat Cailin that are stuck there, holding besieged by, on either side, they just sit there drinking all day, So it's George has a very specific way that he expresses Theon's discomfort in trying to be something he's not. And the pride theme, again, as I said, is going to be really big. Of course, Theon is really wrapped up in how this is beneath him and how he should be doing bigger things, how he deserves to have his own castle and how he deserves to be seen as the heir, all these other things that he hasn't really earned, but he has pride wrapped up in. And then, but at the same time, he's clever enough to manipulate someone else's pride in Dagmar Cleftjaw. And we see that very distinctly. It's not subtle when Theon is thinking, oh, pride will get him. That's the thing. In fact, we pulled that quote. Here it is.
Pride, Theon thought. He is proud. I must use that. His pride will be the key. I think it took me longer to get to reading the quote than the quote itself.
It's not
took.
a very long quote.
It's
yeah.
not. It's not. It's really frustrating when your mouse is just a little too slow and you're like, come on. But okay.
And this is so interesting because Theon's pride and Dagmar's pride are very different types of pride. Dagmar is like held up as a true Ironborn, like as Ironborn as they come. And Theon clearly likes and admires him, even looks up to him and sees him as maybe, he calls him uncle. And that's telling because most of the parental figures in Theon's life are bad or he has some sort of trauma wrapped up in, or at least doesn't feel quite right about, Ned Stark, for example, and his relationship to the Northerners in general. But he doesn't seek to be like Dagmar, even though Dagmar is sort of the ideal Ironborn, quote unquote. And it's explained pretty well by Dagmar. He gets to the heart of it. It's not that Balon Greyjoy doesn't trust Theon. It's that he doesn't really know what he's all about. And he says here, it is only Theon. The boy wolf is your friend, and these Starks had you for 10 years.
I am no Stark. Lord Eddard saw to that. I am a Greyjoy, and I mean to be my father's heir. How can I do that unless I prove myself with some great deed?
Yeah, this is Theon's need for approval is huge. He's saying this he's couching it in how I need to do something big to prove myself, but it's not just that he's proving himself to his people, he's proving himself to his father. He wants acceptance, he wants approval. And that's why Dagmar is so important here, because Dagmar, in this chapter, it's pointed out how Dagmar was very approving of Theon. He was the uncle that would smile at him when he did well in training and with, whether it was sailing a ship or throwing an axe or shooting a bow, whatever. Now, Dagmar is an interesting character. He's still around. Let's take a look at another thing he says here. Quote,
any force he summons will be larger than mine, Dagmar said, and these old knights are more cunning than you think, or they never would have lived to see their first gray hair. You set us a battle we cannot hope to win, Theon. This Torrhen Square will never fall.
Now, that's funny because it falls twice to Dagmar Cleftjaw. He takes it, then he takes it again later, and that's currently where he is. He's currently holding it at the end of A Dance with Dragons, even into the Winds of Winter spoiler chapters. He's still got it. So that's funny. And it's clever because Theon's right. His plan is good. This is, again, an interesting comparison to Cersei. Cersei has occasionally, if not even a little more often, good plans. She's clever, but she messes it up with when her personality gets in the way and her pride gets in the way, in particular, her paranoia. Theon's less paranoid, but he has the pride and other issues that have a lot to do with his family. Same with Cersei. Now, so he, and also ironic that the reason Theon's plan is so good and clever is because he knows how Northerners think. He lived among them for so long, and his plan involves understanding how Sir Rodrik thinks. He's like, oh, Sir Rodrik can't not summon his men and go come to the rescue of Ned Stark's vassal. That's his duty. That's what he's going to do. And he's right. That is exactly what Sir Rodrik does. He plays him like a fiddle. And he only knows that because he says, I am no Stark, but he knows this because he lived with the Starks for so long. He learned how people like Sir Rodrik think because he lived amongst them. He doesn't really credit that, though. So, lots of interesting stuff there. Couple other random questions and bits here. In our endless wonderings about the White Walkers and the Long Night and how they'll impact the different regions, the island nations remain, apart. The show basically writes it all off. Well, it basically wrote the actual Long Night itself off, too. So, we're completely, wait for it, in the dark. Maybe the others will get the Iron Islands, too, somehow, because it's just that cold. Maybe the sea freezes. That seems a bit much, but you never know. I mean, Euron is messing around with fell powers. Maybe that'll doom his own people somehow. Maybe he'll make them all into some great mass sacrifice in a sense. Maybe the clue is delivered here and in Bran 5, which is only 2 chapters back. Meaning, in both chapters, someone curses and says just that. The others take all such cowards, is said by Lewin with regards to Theon's reaving. Though, remember, he doesn't actually know it's Theon. Still, that's beside the point. And here, Benford Tallheart says, the others bugger your wet god. And, well, maybe that's the fate that the Iron Islands have coming for them. I don't know. These are just people cursing. We might be looking... This might be a stretch to link those things. But I remain curious how winter will affect the island nations and what that's going to mean for the future of the series. Interesting, too, that amongst all the talk of Theon thinking like, he's worried that Dagmar Cleftjaw will take the glory of this battle, so he leaves Dagmar to guard the ships. Dagmar isn't the only person in Theon's squad that seems kind of carefully chosen. One of the men mentioned in this chapter is Gavin Harlaw, and it's later said that several Harlaws are with Theon at Winterfell. meaning that they're killed by the Boltons later, but that's beside the point. The presence of Harlaw men with Theon makes sense because Theon's mother is Alanis Harlaw, and they're one of the most powerful Ironborn houses. Of course, their current lord is fan favorite Rodrik the Reader. Gotta love him. Also mentioned is Black Lauren, who Dagmar says is one of the best fighters on the Iron Islands in current times, and he also is on this mission, which is just, as we said, just reaving. It's not meant to be a crucial part of Balon's strategy, in quotes, because it's such a bad strategy. Black Lauren also reminds me of Yoren, who was dressed in black, and his death is going to be similar to Yoren's as well, in that they find him hacked pretty badly, but with several dead enemies around him, meaning it seems to be that he took several enemies down with him as they were taking him down. Finally, there's Botleys all over Theon's group. Wex himself is a bastard of Sargon Botley. And interestingly, Aeron's sacrifice of Benford Talhart is a bit of a parallel to what Theon is faced with right now, as things stand, where his arc lies in the Winds of Winter. Because Stannis is talking like he might burn him. And Asha is like, don't burn him, sacrifice him to the old gods, like, your Northerners would want. And, of course, Asha is just trying to save her brother from burning to death, which even she, who, as we know from Theon's chapters, is Ironborn. She does not have a weak stomach for these things, but even she got queasy when she saw people being burned alive. So that really tells you something about burning alive and how bad it is. Sure, Theon's not true Ironborn. His stomach turns at much lighter things, like drinking ale or heavy cream, and also, reaving. Asha, however, can handle all those things, but even she does not like seeing someone burned. So that's kind of an aside, but still important. Great discussions on Flick in our group there regarding the Ironborn's ability, or rather inability, to look ahead. How their long-term planning resembles reaving with a little more forethought. Capture a few key strategies. Step 2. Step 3, profit. Right? Yeah. Balon's plans is very much like the Underpants Gnomes in that he thinks step 1 is really great, but he's missing step 2. and so he just sees the profit at the end of it all, even though he doesn't know how he's actually going to get there. And when you sit down and examine the plan, you too sit there and wonder, how does he really think he's getting from point A to point C here? There's no point B. Yep. So another short chapter, but packs quite a punch. Only Theon's third chapter out of, I forget. I think it's 5, 6, or 7. Anyway, they start to get a lot more exciting when he gets to Winterfell and gets pathetic with his really trying to hold on to it. But we'll see that soon. Now it's time to move on. Arya 8. The Lion Gang leaves Harrenhal, a.k.a. the one with Basilisk blood. After hearing about Oxcross from so many sources, we get to see, albeit from a distance, the reaction of the person who matters most, Tywin Lannister. Quote,
confusion and clangor ruled the castle.
Yeah, short but meaningful and telling, because, when people are getting ready to march, a lot of the soldiers who were camped at Harrenhal, who have been there for quite a while, are all getting ready to leave. We see, first off, Adam Marbrand leaving. He leaves a day before a lot of the others. And as I said at the beginning, we get mention of his house's castle and how important it is during Bran's chapter. And then we see the man himself here in Arya's chapter,
He's
3 chapters later. I'm sorry?
Where he's magnificent when they describe him.
It's true. Like, Arya's talking about how the girls are, in love with him.
Yeah,
he's
his
handsome.
long flowing red hair, and, he's basically like a red-haired Jaime.
Yeah.
That's what I pictured.
And Jaime and him are like buddies. They're like best friends.
Exactly.
That's the first guy he trains to train with after losing his hand.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I like Adam Marbrand.
Yeah, he seems
All
like
the
a decent
girls
dude
do.
on the wrong side.
Yeah.
He's almost certainly toast, right?
Yeah.
But not yet. He's still alive as things stand.
But we've got this quote. Their banners flared and flapped, a pageant of color, red ox and golden mountain, purple unicorn and bantam rooster, brindled boar and badger, a silver ferret and a juggler and motley, stars and sunbursts, peacock and panther, chevron and dagger, black hood and blue beetle and green arrow.
I love that description. That's really cool.
Black hood and blue beetle and
yeah,
green
no, just
arrow.
all of it. But black hood and blue beetle and green arrow. So eventually we're going to do, probably pretty soon, Where Are They Now for Arya's time in Harrenhal. And when we do so, I'll go through who all these houses are. The people left behind after everyone leaves is Amory Lorch, who is granted castellanship of Harrenhal, which is a job you should not want because of the fate that waits anyone who holds Harrenhal. And of course, the Bloody Mummers are left to stay behind with Lorch. Now, I think this is another example of Tywin just making a mistake. The Bloody Mummers aren't trustworthy, and he leaves an equal number of them with Amory Lorch, and the Lorch and the Mummers hate each other. So you got commanders that don't like each other. You got the Mummers who aren't trustworthy, and as we know, Harrenhal in Tywin's rear is pretty important. If he loses it, he's trapped between Robb's army and a hostile enemy castle, which is pretty bad considering how the Riverlands has been torched and, removed of all of its food. So if Tywin's army needed to support itself in the Riverlands, it would have a really hard time doing so. So I think this was another mistake by Tywin, and it's definitely going to kind of bite him in the butt a little bit, even though circumstances really work out for him with regards to the battle at Stone Mill and the timing of Stannis and all that. But we'll get to that later. Let's stick with Harrenhal. Arya hears about Oxcross at last, and we hear what the men at Harrenhal are thinking, which is rumory, very supernatural, very wrapped up in all the business we were talking about before with wargs and all that. So let's hear the quote.
Giants, I tell you, he's got giants 20 foot tall come down from beyond the wall, follow him like dogs. Not natural coming on them so fast in the night and all. He's more wolf than man. All of them Starks are.
Yeah, so it goes to show, and then of course another guy here, there's more that we didn't bother to quote. There's one guy who says they should be afraid of us, and another guy is like, well, maybe we should be afraid of them. And, it just goes to show it's like a little pastiche of the common man who's forced to go into war, and they have no idea what's going on. They're not told a lot. Of course, Tywin is not exactly the type of leader that's going to tell his men everything that's happening. He's in fact likely to keep everything he can a secret. He says only what he really thinks he has to, which is very little. So this is super important. It's going to be later that Arya realizes Tywin is the kind of person that she should have been trying to have assassinated, but you can kind of see, she's a 10-year-old girl. She's mostly dealing with what's right in front of her. She's suffering. She's traumatized. She's in a bad place. And she does have the thought eventually. She does realize, damn, I've been making a mistake. I really should have been.
But she doesn't realize she could tell him to kill anyone anywhere.
That's true. It doesn't have to be Harrenhal.
She really is stuck on the idea like, oh, he left tonight and I can't get him now. But she just never realizes, like, I could kill Cersei with him.
That's a good point.
And why would she think that, though? Like, to be fair, that's kind of a ridiculous, idea to think someone has that ability.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. So there's it's interesting to think about Arya's future here, because we know that this is with Jaqen giving her advice, and with Jaqen being all, oh, I could hear you sneaking in, you should be barefoot. It's like fast forwarding to the kind of lesson she's going to get at the House of Black and White. It's like, it's very clear that he's recruiting her. We know, of course, now because of the benefit of rereading, but you could kind of tell even on the first time that something's a little odd with the way he interacts with her. Now, you wonder too about being powerful. She thinks to herself about how powerful she is because she has this ability to kill with a whisper, and you wonder about that because A Song of Ice and Fire has so much to do with power dynamics and just the way power corrupts people and the way it affects people around us, and from high to low in society, what power does. So the ability to kill, the skills that Arya is going to have later are going to be immense. She's going to have a great ability to kill people, and that's arguably something that can be a corrupting influence. And it's part of why the House of Black and White is religious, and a lot of these assassins guilds are religious, because you have to surrender to a higher power to not as a way to avoid that power corrupting you. If you believe you're wielding that power at the behest of a god, you're a lot less likely to think that you can go off and kill whoever you want. And of course, that's very taboo for the Faceless Men to kill for personal reasons. But Arya may not get a full Faceless Man training, and so she maintains some of her starkness. So I feel it's not unlikely that Arya might be. She might take out a few people that maybe don't deserve it, or maybe that haven't earned it. You know, she does that with Darion, right? She kills Darion, and it's kind of like one of those examples where it's like, yeah, he kind of deserved it, but is it really her job to do that? No. It's not, right? It's not. It's right. That's the Night's Watch's business. So it's like, is she killing too often? Is she getting too into this power? Well, this is where that starts. If so, that's where this starts, because she has these thoughts about how powerful she is with, I can kill at a whisper, and it's not good to have that power, y'all. That is corrupting.
I just want to say, you brought up here the thing about hot pie hearing Winterfell.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, it was go to hell.
It was go to hell.
I just really like that. Also, because in the show we have that winter hell.
Yeah, winter hell.
Anyway.
And I love that she says, her response to Gendry is, so what? He was yelling hot pie. He must have yelled hot pie 100 times. And I'm like, that is hard to not think about. Hot pie. That's your battle cry, dude. That's awesome. Hot pie is the best comic relief. Well, he's not the best. He's up there. He's tied with several other wonderful comic relief characters. I love me some hot pie, both the real stuff and the character. And of course, also the fear is huge. Like the power of scaring people with your ability to kill is part of it, right? Everyone's afraid of the House of Black and White in Braavos and elsewhere, but especially in Braavos. I mean, look at the reaction of the captain when Arya gives her the coin later. He's like, holy crap, I will treat you as if you are, a princess. I will treat you with the utmost respect. This is a reputation that spans all over. And so that's pretty important. I think that's really telling. And Arya is going to have that weight of power on her. And we'll see what that does to her in the long run. And it's interesting, too, how this fear, this power is displayed in subtle ways. Say, when Arya is interacting with Rorge, and Rorge is threatening her. And then she just the mention of Jaqen changes his disposition instantly.
Rorge halted. Something in his eyes. Could it be that he was scared of Jake and Hagar?
Yes. It seems that's exactly what it is. And you wonder what he did to scare them. Maybe it was just change his face in front of them, or just show his skills off. There's a variety of ways he could have showed off his skills to them, to scare the heck out of them. So let's look at her list again for just a second, though. It's interesting that Rorge isn't on there, for one thing, but the list is interesting. Let's go through it real quick. Wyse, Dunsen, Polliver, Raff the Sweetling, the Tickler, the Hound, Sir Gregory, Sir Emery, Sir Ilyn, Sir Meryn, King Joffrey, and Queen Cersei.
By the way, you didn't grab it in this way, but I think it's interesting that she groups them.
Yeah, she does group them.
She does group them.
She does kind of group them with their group. Wyse is kind of by himself. Dunsen, Polliver, Raff, the Tickler. The Hound doesn't really belong in that group, but Sir Gregory's right, or Sir Gregor is right after.
Gregor and Amory together.
Yeah, she puts those knights together. Gregory, Amory, Ilyn, Meryn. 4 knights in a row, and then the king and the queen. Mm-hmm. The queen regent, rather. But still, same thing. Great catch by, I think it was Joe Buckley, who points out that she's reciting her list while fixing her shift. Which is because she hates needlework, and she's doing needlework while reciting her list, so that's really appropriate. Also, it's a bone needle, which has gives it a sense of doom for those people. Now let's talk about the actual death of Wyse here. Wyse barely knew you, and that's good because Wyse don't like you. Quote: "This place is cursed."
The man with the crossbow said, "It's Heron's ghost, that's what it is," said Goodwife Amabel. "I'll not sleep here another night. I swear it."
We're pretty sure she does sleep there another night, and she has been sleeping there a long time. Goodwife Amabel is one of the characters who was part of Lady Shella's household, so she's been there for quite a while. Anyway, it's interesting how he's able to do that. She wonders how did Jaqen get the dog to attack the master? That's like, everyone knows dogs are super loyal. But she does learn very precisely in A Feast for Crows, the Cat of the Canals chapter, the waif tells her in no uncertain terms what happened.
This paste is spiced with basilisk blood. It will give cooked flesh a savory smell, but if eaten, it produces violent madness in beasts as well as men. A mouse will attack a lion after a taste of basilisk blood. Arya chewed her lip. Would it work on dogs?
Mm-hmm.
It obviously proves that Arya very clearly remembers this incident and puts the pieces
She was
together.
still curious. She's like, oh, so that's what he did. So that raises another question, though. Where did Jaqen get the basilisk blood, right? There's a lot of places he could have gotten it, actually. We know he didn't have it when he was in the when he was captured by Yoren, because, like, what's he going to have, a jar of basilisk blood when he's down in the Black Cells? I really don't think so. So it seems likely that he either stole it from the Maester's Tower here at Harrenhal. Maybe he stole it from Qyburn, because Qyburn is there now, and Qyburn is with the Bloody Mummers. Or maybe just when he was riding around raiding with Amory Lorch, they attacked several different places. Maybe he found it there. No one else in the company of, Reavers, who mostly aren't even literate, aren't likely to give a crap about a bunch of Maester's jars unless they know what they are, which they won't. So, there you go. Joe Buckley agrees with the talk of Tywin's strategy isn't so great. He has a different. He adds on to my take by saying Tywin has to march west because he's being threatened, and all he's managed to do is kill defenseless Riverlanders and create a famine. Yeah, that's mostly what he's accomplished. It's true. He did sort of keep the Riverlands from uniting against him, sort of, because, well, that's exactly what they do in the next chapter, which we're getting to in just a minute. Catelyn 5, that is. Interesting little subtle quote from Wheeze here. What he says here is, keep those eyes to yourself, or next time I'll spoon one out and feed it to my bitch. Yet, by chapter's end, the dog is feeding on his face instead, and Arya does wind up blind when she's at the House of Black and White. They give her this sense training to take her sight away. So that might be foreshadowing, considering how much of this chapter is wrapped up in foreshadowing for her time at the House of Black and White later. And the armorer that Arya is sent to find Lucan. Gendry works for Lucan right now. He's going to be executed by Roose because, well, as bad as the Bloody Members and Amory Lorch are, arguably Roose is even worse. There's some more Faceless Man training sort of subtly referenced here in how Weiss treats her. Quote,
he could look at you and smell what you were thinking. He always said so.
Yeah, that's a big part of it's basically the same language is used when Jaqen is telling her how he heard her. He's like, when she's so surprised that he heard her sneaking up, she starts to think about that, and she thinks to herself, he must have heard my thoughts too, because he immediately answers the question that she was thinking. And so this is kind of a tie-in for this type of education she's going to receive when she's at the House of Black and White. And she's going to be doing the same kind of day-to-day stuff, cleaning up, managing dead bodies and just basic chores that even though she's going to be working on her own future instead of being trapped and serving evil people, well, maybe the Faceless Men are evil too, she's a lot happier there than she is at Harrenhal. Now, also, there's and that's a setup too for the lying game and other tougher, though, like I said, less degrading challenges she'll face in the House of Black and White. Weiss doesn't seal the messages he sends with her as he's sending messages from people to people all around Harrenhal, because he doesn't think she can read, which is a safe assumption, but wrong. And that's also an assumption that Varys no doubt plays on regularly with or without his little birds. Now, to be fair, literacy is a lot more common at court, but we know there's lots of illiterate people all around court and outside of court that Varys deals with, because Varys obviously does business outside of court. Arya deals real quickly with a knight who had a gambling debt, and she steals a silver-banded drinking horn and runs off, and there's the line, in his mail, he couldn't keep up. This is sort of a general statement on that that quick, unencumbered people can really have an edge against, in single combat at least, against a heavily armored knight, like, say, Oberyn. I mean, well, technically Oberyn lost, but his strategy worked. A better example might be Bran versus Ser Vardis in the Vale. But Arya, I really wonder if she's ever going to face down some knights in one-on-one combat. And if so, well, I don't think those knights are coming out of that alive. And if we're going to try to imagine who those knights are, well, 3 of them are on her list. Meryn, Ilyn, and Gregor. Gregor is now Sir Robert Strong, so...
Seems unlikely.
That's the least likely of the 3, by far, I have to agree.
Sir Ellen is also unlikely.
Sir Ellen's kind of unlikely, but Sir Meryn, she kills him on TV, too.
Yeah, and I don't think it won't be in that context.
It won't because that's the Wrath the Sweetling death.
Yeah, exactly, but yeah, maybe she does kill him.
Yeah, and maybe it's even... And of course, that would be very fitting because it's Sir Meryn that comes for Syrio, and that's why he's on the list. So... if she could use all her skills that she's learned in Bravos and from him, that would be very fitting. And I would much prefer to her taking him out in single combat rather than just sneaking up on him and stabbing him. Any way she kills him is fine with me, but I would love it if they actually like dueled and he just got owned by her. Archmaester Renly adds to the also commented on the needlework that she's doing actual needlework in this one. Yeah, it's funny. She doesn't have needle, but she's doing needlework. Indeed. All right, let's go on to our final chapter of the day. That would be Catelyn 5. The gang returns to Riverrun, a.k.a. the one with Edmure's big plan. Another big plan. Theon had a big plan. Edmure has a big plan. Neither of the plans work out the way they were intended, but they sure are interesting. Here's the opening quote.
2 days' ride from Riverrun, a scout spied them watering their horses beside a muddy stream.
And they are among the last to hear about the Battle of Oxcross, at least among those who we care about and that are particularly relevant to the story. And that's because they've been traveling. So they've been on the road, avoiding other people because there's, lots of the traveling was dangerous. There's lots of armies around and hostiles and broken men and all that. So they're avoiding people, which means they are not hearing the news. And so once they get to Riverrun, they hear all the news they missed out of. And here is an important quote right on there.
The young wolf was paying the Lannisters back in kind for the devastation they'd inflicted on the Riverlands. Lords Karstark and Glover were raiding along the coast. Lady Mormont had captured thousands of cattle and was driving them back toward Riverrun, while the Great John had seized the gold mines at Castamere, Nuns Deep, and the Pendrick Hills. Ser Wendell laughed.
And Wendell makes a joke about nothing makes a Lannister come running than a threat to his gold. We're supposed to laugh at that too, I suppose.
Also, but just before you go on to this, I just want to posit the idea, a little short story of Daisy Mormont, of Lady Mormont. I guess that's Mage Mormont. Of them being like a Western driving cattle. It's just a very funny image of like all of this is going on and they just gotta get the cattle back to Riverrun.
That's pretty big. Like, it's a pretty big deal when the Riverlands is so shattered of food.
It's incredibly important to get all those cattle. Yeah. Exactly. It's why it's like a life or death mission that they have. It's an intense Western.
Yeah. It's an intense Western.
And it's in the West even, see?
Very true. Now, but the thing is, this is kind of sad, right? We feel bad for the Riverlands because they got shredded by these awful people. I don't think that Robb's men are going to be a whole lot nicer than Amory Lorch and the Bloody Mummers and Gregor. They're probably a little bit nicer. They're probably not as bloody. They're probably not quite as rapey, but they're still raping and pillaging. It's still awful. These are completely innocent people that just happen to be living in the West under Tywin Lannister. They didn't elect him. They don't deserve any of this. And but that's hidden from us a bit because of the way it's couched. It's couched as a victory. It's couched. Sir Wendell's laughing. We're supposed to be, Ashea points out this image of Lady Mormont driving cattle. It's a little it's strange to think about these things, but it disguises just how terrifying this all is. Especially think about, okay, so maybe they're not as bad as Lorch and Gregor and the Bloody Mummers, but they're pretty bad. But who is probably just as bad as them is Lord Karstark, the dude who's just angry, so vindictive. You do not want to be in a village raided by Lord Karstark. That dude is still angry about his sons. I mean, his 2 sons are killed near the end of book 1. He doesn't murder the young Lannister captives until A Storm of Swords, early on, relatively, not long after Cat frees Jaime, which is technically at the end of this book. So he's had this long campaign where all they do is win, right? They're winning and winning and winning, but he's still so mad. He kills Sir Stafford himself. And honestly, you know, we wonder, this is one of the discussions we had on Facebook. It said that he stabbed, rammed Sir Stafford Lannister in the back with his lance when he was chasing after a horse. You wonder if Sir Stafford Lannister wasn't just running away. I mean, like, they make it sound like he was chasing a horse, but that might just be more of the way the rumor is coming out, because most of the rumors are coming from Western sources, and they're not going to make Sir Stafford look bad. And that's the best you can do to make someone look, to hide the fact that he was running away. It's like, oh, he was trying to get to his horse. You know, it's like, his horse was running away, and he was running in the same direction. I don't know if he was actually chasing the horse or just fleeing in the same general path. And of course, so that's some of his revenge right there. Rickard kills an important Lannister, but he still wants more than that. And when just think about this, just to show just how bitter and angry and vindictive he is, when he kills those boys, his own son is still in Lannister captivity. And he's just like, they may execute my son for this, but oh well. And it's his eldest son too. I mean, his eldest, meaning was the eldest before the other 2 were killed. So, damn. I'm not sure even Sandor Clegane can match Rickard Karstark when it comes to being, you know, just eaten alive by a need for revenge. And Rickard Karstark is a much more powerful person than Sandor Clegane, being a lord, and an effective one, a key part of you know, Robb's army. When Sandor leaves the Lannisters, they're just like, oh, well, that's one guy. He was a pretty useful guy, but he's still just one dude. When Robb loses Rickard, he loses all of the Karstark army, which is very significant. So good a time to remind ourselves that Willem Lannister's twin, Martin, was captured at Oxcross in this battle. And Willem is going to be one of the ones killed. Martin is eventually swapped for Robert Glover in a prisoner exchange. And part of the reason that swap is made in a hurry is because Robb is worried that Martin's life is in danger too. So, really, the Rickard Karstark saga is bigger than we may have given it credit for, you know, on an earlier read, because there's subtext happening even here off page. Now, here's where we get into some talk about the comparisons to Robb Stark, aka the Young Wolf, and Daeron the First Targaryen, aka the Young Dragon. Here's a quote about how Robb was able to take the golden tooth.
He never
or get around it, rather.
Yeah, I was like, well, it would have been very funny if you said how he was able to take. He never took it. He never took it. He slipped around it in the night. It said the direwolf showed him the way, that gray wind of his. The beast sniffed out a goat track that wound down a defile and up along beneath a ridge, a crooked and stony way, yet wide enough for men riding single file. The Lannisters, in their watchtowers, got not so much a glimpse of them. Rivers lowered his voice. There's some say that after the battle, the king cut out Sir Stafford Lannister's heart and fed it to the wolf. I just have to say I was very distracted because I have my hair in a braid and I have a cat in my lap and he's trying to eat my braid. that was all.
Better than a wolf trying to eat your braid.
Yeah, stop.
That's more distracting. So here's a quote that we'll analyze that quote, but first let's pair it with one that enumerates a large number of these young wolf / young dragon parallels. Here it is.
Daeron divided.
If you can read it while your hair is being eaten.
Daeron divided his host into 3 forces, one led by Lord Tyrell, who came down the Prince's Pass at the western end of the Red Mountains of Dorne, one led by the king's cousin and master of ships, Alan Valerian, traveling by sea, and one led by the king himself, marching down the treacherous pass called the Bone Way, where he made use of goat tracks that others considered too dangerous, to go around the Dornish watchtowers and avoid the same traps that had caught Orys Baratheon.
So here the pairing is Dornish watchtowers is the same as the parallel to the Golden Tooth. Goat tracks are mentioned in both. In both cases, you have a mountainous area. You have like a non-mountainous area where you're trying to get into a mountainous area, and it involves using these goat tracks. In both cases, you have the forces being split. Robb split his forces and into two. In this example with Daeron, the young dragon, he split his host into 3 forces. However, the parallel is still there, even though it's a split of 2 versus a split of 3, because in the case of Daeron, the third arm of the army is actually the navy, and Alan Valerian, as it says, traveling by sea, marching down the pass, he was attacking different targets like the Planky Town along the Greenblood River, which, if Balon Greyjoy had accepted Robb's alliance, this is exactly what would have been happening. Balon would have been reaving up and down the west coast while Robb was attacking it on land. So there would have been 3 forces had that gone the way Robb wanted it to. But Balon, of course, had other plans. Now, of course, we also see in this comparison something that isn't a comparison, that there's no comp to the young dragon with regards to the wolf here. The young dragon did not have a dragon, so he doesn't even have his own magical animal to compare to. But still, it's interesting to see the rumor
he didn't even have his own magical animal.
He didn't even have a magical animal. What a sucker. What a loser. So another important part of this chapter is the groundwork for the Red Wedding. And what we have here is the false envoys. And the reason that's groundwork for the Red Wedding is because Edmure talks about how they were given free reign of the castle. These guys who came to deliver Sir Cleos and the peace offer, the negotiations back and forth about exchanging prisoners and all that. So technically, Tyrion violated guest right here. It's not something that's mentioned a lot even in the story, but that is what we have. And it's obviously well before the Red Wedding, which is a much bigger, more blatant and loud violation of guest right. So I think that's really important, and it's neat to see how early this starts up. And it's also neat to see that Tyrion isn't fully accused of it. He's not really openly called someone who violated guest right, but technically he did, and that might come back to bite him in the butt when he's, assuming he's hand for Daenerys, and he's facing all these character issues that people think he has, like being a kinslayer and a violator of guest right. So that's a pretty big deal. Plus all the other reasons people hate him because of just what he looks like and all that. Can't forget that. That always matters, even though it's not fair. It's certainly true. On the other hand, we have Edmure here. Edmure's a guy that, separating the battle plan here. Let's just talk about him for a second. You gotta love that he cares about his people enough to bring them in to his castle to protect them. Sure, there's arguments that it's, quote, bad strategy, but what's a good strategy? Is it good strategy if it involves leaving your people to starve to death? Like, how is that a good strategy? You can say it's the only strategy if things are that desperate. I mean, if it's kill or be killed and there's no other choice, okay.
If it's between we all die or most of us die, but some of us live, well, it's better,
that's the kind of thing that we don't, as modern humans, we can't really know what it's like to be in a position like that. Well, we in particular, maybe other people can.
Yeah, other people can, but we in particular can't. But no, I love that line that Edmure says. It's incredibly sweet when Edmure just says, "My people, they were afraid."
Yeah. Right? Edmure, that's the right attitude, man. So props to Edmure for being one of the few lords that gets it, that it is about, like, protecting your people is not something you can set aside. It's your main job as a lord. But it's important to note that he doesn't get full points here because, yes, he's better than most lords in that. Still, a big part of all this is his pride. He is very motivated by pride. I mean, what's the first line of his next chapter, or Catelyn's next chapter? Tell father, I'm going to go make him proud. It's the actual first line of the next chapter. And he just doesn't he hates the idea of letting Tywin cross Tully lands. Like that really touches on his pride. He hates that idea. On the other hand, it's true that he comes up with this plan that the other lords think is a pretty good plan. So, there's a long-standing fandom debate whether Edmure's plan for the battle, which turns into the Battle at Stone Mill, is actually a good plan, whether Robb should have communicated better, whether Robb should have seen Edmure's initiative going this far. I don't see it as black and white. I see blame on both sides. Robb probably should have communicated better. Robb probably should have understood the type of person he's dealing with, the type of man Edmure is, and realized that how important it is to his plan to work, that everyone needs to follow along with it. So I think there is some share of blame to put on Robb. On the other hand, Edmure went really far with this. He did things that Robb could not have foreseen. Like, for example, pulling all the garrison out of the Twins. Robb left 400 men at the Twins, sort of as a garrison, but also sort of to keep them from betraying him. And Edmure undermined that. I think Edmure could have done his plan without those 400 men. I think he should have left those there. On the other hand, he makes a good argument as to why they can trust the Freys. He lays out all the reasons why the Freys have been everything you could want from an ally to this point. And he's not wrong. The Freys have been a really good ally to this point. Even though we know better, we know they're working behind the scenes, we know how bad it's going to go. To be fair, to this point, they have been nothing but staunch. So, from Edmure's point of view, maybe he should have been more wary of who he was dealing with. His father knew not to trust Lord Walder. His sister knows not to trust Lord Walder. So he should maybe not have weighed the current evidence so much as the full weight of evidence across Lord Walder's life. Still, anyway. So I'm not going to come down too hard on Edmure or on Robb, but I will say I think that they both made some mistakes here. It's not just black and white. Now, on the other hand, Edmure mentions that, hey, look, yes, we gave away our 400 men at the Twins, which is keeping Lord Walder honest, but we still have those 2 hostages at Winterfell, Big and Little Walder, so we still have something. And that's a good point. Now, he also orders... let's read this quote here for what the other part of his plan is.
If we're 2 hostages to the good, all the more reason Lord Walder dare not play us false. Bolton needs Frey's men, and Ser Helmans as well. I've commanded him to retake Harrenhal.
That's like to be a bloody business, Catelyn says. And then here, in Arya 9, which is her next chapter, Robert Glover says... Very well, he said. Let's make an end to this bloody business, which is right during the Weasel Soup incident. So he's making an end to the taking of Harrenhal. So a little humor wordplay there from George. And it was bloody, but it wasn't the kind of bloody Cat and Edmure thought it would be, because Roose takes Harrenhal by subterfuge, not by assault. And of course, Roose will still have Harrenhal when he turns on Robb, and that's a bloody business too. And it's going to be huge because Cat's going to set Jaime and Brienne free, and they're going to be caught by none other than Vargo Hoat, who turns them over to Roose Bolton minus a hand. That's really crucial to all this. So, another big part of this chapter is Brienne's oath to Catelyn, which is pretty important because, as we know, much has been made of Littlefinger, Lady Stoneheart, thinking
Sorry, I just want to say Littlefinger.
Littlefinger. Yeah, he's a rapper.
Lil Sebastian, Lil Wayne, Littlefinger.
Yeah, so a big deal is made out of Lady Stoneheart's perception of how Brienne broke the oath, which we know she didn't break. In fact, she's been sticking to it tightly, more so than just about anyone has kept to any oath in the entire series. But we should consider the opposite, which is Cat's oath to Brienne. This is not a one-sided thing. They take an oath to each other. Here it is.
And I vow that you shall always have a place by my hearth and meat and mead at my table, and pledge to ask no service of you that might bring you into dishonor. I swear it by the old gods and the new. Arise.
Won't ask her to do anything that might bring her dishonor, eh? Arguably, she's doing that right now with the cliffhanger ending, meaning she's making Brienne catch Jaime and bring her to her. At least that's what it looks like from the end of Dance with Dragons. And Jaime was really good to her. Even though Jaime wasn't good to Catelyn, he wasn't bad because he did try to follow through. He did try to let Sansa, and he did try to do what he pledged. He just wasn't able to because Jaime's not in charge. And because, well, Sansa was gone. Sansa wasn't there for her to give over. Sansa had fled. Thank you, Purple Wedding. So this is going to be quite interesting, how Brienne's inner conflict and how she's going to play this out and which vow she decides to take over the other. And that's really big too, right? Because part of Jaime and Brienne's story from the get-go is Jaime lamenting about conflicting vows and how, I'm the Kingslayer, but I also took a vow to defend the weak, and he was about to blow up King's Landing. Which vow was I supposed to pick there? So Brienne is kind of in a similar spot where she's got conflicting vows, and finally, she's someone who always made things out to be kind of simple when it comes to vows. You follow your vows, you take your oath, you see it through. So she's finally getting into a spot where, it's not so simple to fulfill all your vows, is it? Because sometimes they overlap and conflict with each other. Hoster continues to spiral closer to death. Last time he mistook Catelyn for his wife / her mother. This time he mistakes Catelyn for Lysa. And he's asking for forgiveness this time, though, and that's building up to the pretty awkward, forcible abortion that he tricked her into taking, not unlike what Jane Westerling's mother is doing to her probably right around now. News of what's happened to Robb is late because Robb, he sent that message from Ashmark, but by the time that message got there and they've read it, he's probably already moved on. So he said he was heading towards the stronghold of the Westerlings. So I'm thinking that around this point, he's already slept with Jane, and it's just that news hasn't come to the rest of the world yet. That's going to be soon, though. More Freys are introduced, building up to the coming split of House Frey and House Stark. Martin Rivers is on display here. He takes the Blackfish's job while Blackfish is in the West, so you got to know that he's pretty darn capable. If you're the next in line to take Blackfish's job, you're up there in skills. Martin Rivers is later going to be betrothed to Joy Hill, who is the bastard daughter of Geryon Lannister, a.k.a. the Geryon who went off to head to Valyria. So a Hill marrying a Rivers, that's about right, isn't it? Now, unfortunately, this is where we, at least for now, but for a long time, say goodbye to our good friend, Captain Obvious. But the good news is he's not dead, probably. But yeah, he's not going to be around. But he gets in at least one more of his well-known style of lines right here.
They have hanged some Lannisters, Hal Mullen observed.
Yeah, so you see a bunch of dudes in red cloaks hanging, and, well, they've hanged some Lannisters. Yep. He never fails to deliver.
You're Captain Obvious right now, because we heard the quote. We know what he said.
I'm just trying to be more like him. He's my
your
my
hero.
Idol.
Yeah, he's your idol.
My idol. He's my hero. So, of course, Catelyn charges them with bringing Ned's bones back to Winterfell. And this story is incomplete. Captain Obvious and the Silent Sisters. I love this. This is just, it's a sitcom. It's up there with, Arya and Sandor walking around the Riverlands, or Cooper and Darnell, or any number of these Captain Obvious and the Silent Sisters with their first album, Ned's Bones. Just picture them. The Silent Sisters never talk, and Captain Obvious is saying unnecessary things constantly. Like, can you imagine just constantly rolling their eyes at this guy?
Yeah. I really want them to, him to break them.
Yeah, they're just like, God, shut up.
A pad of paper, and they just write, shut up.
Like, thank you. Like, can you just imagine they're like walking into the neck and they see the leaning towers and the thing. Like, there's Moat Catelyn. Like, yeah, we know.
I just want to say also, D Cell said, Hal Mullen always asked to elope in my CK2 playthroughs.
Really?
It's weird. Anyways, I just really thought that was strange.
That's funny. So, yes. So there's a. She's thinking.
Yeah, I'd also wanted to bring up that it made me think of Lady Stoneheart. This
Yeah,
quote.
absolutely.
They have hanged some Lannisters, as does
the
the next
hangman,
quote.
yeah.
Yeah, because she's like hanging people, Lannisters.
Yeah, read the next. Yeah, go ahead and read the next quote.
They will make a statue of him, a stone likeness that will sit in the dark with a direwolf at his feet and a sword across his knees. Which I obviously, it's Lewin talking about Ned,
Yeah.
But it still makes me think a little bit of Stoneheart. It's a stone likeness, direwolf at its feet.
Let's jump ahead in our notes here to the last line of the chapter.
The women in gray bowed their heads. The silent sisters do not speak to the living, Catelyn remembered dully. But some say they can talk to the dead. And how she envied that.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for, Cat. Damn.
Yeah.
Jeez,
you're gonna
talk
be
to the dead.
Just
Can't
as
speak.
silent. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oof, that's rough. Damn, George. Damn. But to speak to actual Captain Obvious and the Silent Sisters, what's up with them? They never do arrive at Winterfell, do they? We don't know where they're at, but we know that there's someone waiting for them. Someone is waiting and watching, and she wants her revenge. There's two possibilities here. The bones could reach the crypts, or at least two main possibilities. What if they reach the crypts only to rise later? Like Ned's bones are among those that attack people hiding in the crypts or something like that.
Still skeptical on that, and kind of skeptical on the bones idea, period.
Yeah, don't you need flesh?
Yeah,
Some
I feel like you
flesh?
need flesh, but maybe a head.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't have
Well,
much of it.
He does have the head. They bolted back on.
Okay, they
like,
bolted
there's
back
like a little
on.
thing
I
attaching
mean,
it.
how connected does it? I guess it's all magic. I don't
Yeah.
really need to care. But I still, just like in the show, the bone whites are.
Looks weird.
It looks weird.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me, and I won't be able to read it without picturing it.
Regardless whether that happens, the other alternative here is Lady Dustin will have her revenge, and her revenge is described here in A Dance with Dragons, Theon's chapter, which is called The Turncloak.
Theon did not understand.
His bones?
Her lips twisted. It was an ugly smile, a smile that reminded him of Ramsay's. Catelyn Tully dispatched Lord Eddard's bones north before the Red Wedding, but your Iron Uncle seized Moat Catelyn and closed the way. I have been watching ever since. Should those bones ever emerge from the swamps, they will get no farther than Barrowton.
Lady Dustin says this quite a long time after this chapter, though, right? Like I said, this is A Dance with Dragons, The Turncloak. This is far, far after this moment. Captain Obvious and the squad clearly got either got around her spies, or they knew about her spies and are being cautious and waiting, or they're still down there. My best guess is that Howland Reed's people found them. Surely that if Howland knew what their business was, taking Ned's bones home, he would want to help them out. That's his best friend's bones. So you would really think that would matter to him. So what's going on there? And if there's a way through the swamp, a way through the neck to evade Lady Dustin's spies, well, you'd think Howland Reed would be able to give them that opportunity. And there is a theory out there that the hooded man in Winterfell that Theon encounters, who sort of talks a little bit like Hal Mullen, he says some kind of obvious things, might be him. Hal Mullen might have infiltrated Winterfell. He may be the mysterious hooded man. We'll have to wait on that mystery, but just know that's a strong possibility. So if it's not him there at Winterfell, I think he's at Greywater Watch with Ned's bones and the Silent Sisters. But possibly both of these things could be true. Maybe he stayed, or maybe he went to Winterfell while the Silent Sisters stayed with the bones at Greywater Watch. We will certainly learn later, but we don't know now. Draw your attention to it, but don't have the answer. A couple more things from y'all and from Joe Buckley. He points out that Catelyn's, as much as any character, has probably traveled the most Now, over time, that'll probably change because characters like Daenerys and Tyrion really just span huge, huge distances. Barristan Selmy as well. Anyone who goes to Essos spans huge distances. Arya also. But at this point, she's been to King's Landing, to the Eyrie, back to the north, down all the way to Riverrun again, and then to Storm's End, and now back to Riverrun again. So
I think you could say that at the point where, like, by the end of A Dance with Dragons, she's still been to the most places in Westeros.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably true.
She's traveled the most,
maybe not the most travel miles, but the most
places,
key locations, places, period.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. I can't think who else would have gone that much.
Yeah, because like you said, like she's been to the Eyrie and just some places that we... Yeah. Storm's End, and we haven't seen a ton of for Storm's End. Yeah,
you're right. Obviously, there's lots of talk here about how Renly died. You have to wonder if the fact that Brienne and Catelyn were the only ones to see the Shadow Assassin will somehow come back into play later. Well, and of course Melisandre. But you wonder if that's how they're all together again. Whether they're going to come together again, or rather, they are together again with the Brotherhood Without Banners, and whether that's going to matter, whether they're going to talk about any of these things. But the fact that they're the two main witnesses to the Shadow Baby might come up big later. And of course, Brienne still has that vow to kill Stannis, which, by the way, Catelyn said, yes, when the time comes, I won't hold you back from Stannis. That's part of her vow, which I guess it still holds, even though she died and came back. There's always the whole Jon Snow trick, legal technicality that maybe Lady Stoneheart doesn't owe Brienne anything because she died and that let her out of her vow. I don't know if that applies. In the Night's Watch vows, it specifically says, my watch won't end until my death. There's no legal standard for, death ending your vows and, for other things, as far as I know. We might need some Westerosi lawyers to weigh in on that one, but yeah, I don't know. Caltrops. There's a big mention of caltrops in this chapter, that Edmure's people are laying caltrops on the riverbanks to slow down Tywin's army. It's part of their plan to keep them from coming out. Caltrops are the landmines of ancient warfare, in that they can sit there undetected for years after the fact and hurt innocents. Now, of course, a mine is going to do a lot more damage than a caltrop, but like it's a little kid or just some pack horse could just step on a caltrop that was unseen for a long time. And they're spread underwater, so they know they're not going to go find them later. It's going to cause problems for them even. They're going to be like, well, don't go near that water. There's a bunch of spikes in it. Just in case you're not aware, caltrop it's like a jumping jack thing, or like, we play the jacks game where you throw the little metal things down. At least one point is always pointing up, no matter how it lands, and all the points are spiky. So when you throw them down on the ground, there's always at least one spike pointing up.
I wonder how many kids have heard of jumping jacks.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know. Am I showing my age with that one?
Yeah, I know what they are, but they were not played with.
Yeah. So Stefan B brings up a nice little nod to the Valonqar prophecy here, because Kat says to Brienne, in reference to Stannis, because Brienne's talking about how much she hates Stannis, and Kat says, well, think about how much I hate Cersei. She says, I'd love to strangle her, wrap my hands around her white throat, which is, also a reference to Lady Stoneheart, because she's hanging just about everybody, and, it's wrapping your hands isn't quite the same as hanging, but it's still being killed by the neck, which is an even better parallel to the Valonqar, as Stefan B says, because that is apparently how Cersei's going to die. Though it probably won't be Stoneheart. It will be via strangulation if the prophecy is accurate. Also a comment from Leaf Underhill. In book, what we find out from Sir Alcer's example, which is that the hand rotted away and stopped moving. Now, we can assume the bones didn't rot away, and the bones stopped, so the bones stopped moving. So that was what you were saying with the skeleton probably can't be animated. Maybe it looks like you do need some flesh to animate the bones, because his hand stopped moving.
I think that's interesting, yeah.
That's very good evidence there, Leaf Underhill. Great catch.
It's two things, though, I will say. It's one about the bones, but two about, reinforce, like the idea of a body part. You don't need the whole person.
That's true.
So it wouldn't matter if you don't have a head, because obviously if a hand can move without any sort of nervous system or any sort of anything to control it, then that tells you that a torso or a head alone could be hopping along, I guess.
Yeah, it's not fully understood, but I think we definitely have narrowed it down a little bit here with these comments and this discussion. And that does it for Catelyn 5, which does it for today's episode of Valar Rereadis. Once again, even though they were shorter chapters, we had a lot to say about them. There's some really important groundwork in these chapters, quick and to the point in a lot of them. I guess you could say they were. Next week, which is still at the usual time of 3 p.m. on Sunday, we will have Daenerys 3, the one where Xaro tries to marry a dragon, a.k.a. Quaithe, Shadowlands travel agent.
Tyrion 9, the gang thinks Myrcella is a riot, a.k.a. the one with king bread.
Davos 2. Only Davos 2 at this point.
It's crazy.
The one where Sir Courtney challenges Stannis to a duel, a.k.a. Shadow Baby 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Jon 5, the gang meets Corran, a.k.a. the notorious half-hand, ready to die.
Tyrion 10, the gang plans Shay's disguise, a.k.a. the one where Varys dreams of The Voice.
And...
Not the TV show, to be clear. But that would be interesting if he dreamt of The Voice, the TV show.
They're very weird. He'd be like, what are these
what
weird
that?
Contraptions and lights? And
spinning seats and...
had a vision. That's what he saw.
That's what The Voice said to him. Was, I want you on my team.
Okay, and finally... I want you on my team. Sorry, it took me a second there. And finally, Catelyn 6, the one where winning is losing, a.k.a. the gang fights the Battle of Stone Mill.
So we'll be ending with a Catelyn chapter 2 weeks in a row. How about that? A little coincidence there. So again, make sure to tune in to I Know That Nerd just after this live stream, which will be
like
20-some minutes or so. I'll take a quick break and then get right back on another multi-hour live stream. But that's live stream living for me. I'm cool with that. So thanks to everybody who came live and attended. Thanks to everyone who watched afterwards. Thanks to everyone who likes and shares History of Westeros podcast. You'd be surprised how much iTunes reviews and likes and word of mouth really matters. It's a big deal. So please do that. Please like and share and spread the word. Also, thanks to Michael Klarfeld. Thanks to Kevin McLeod. Thanks to our Bengineer. Thanks to Nina Friel. Thanks to Joe Buckley. Thanks to all of our commenters on Flick and the Facebook group. I keep saying we're going to have a Discord channel and a Slack channel soon, but not yet still.
Thanks to Jesse Kowal and Joey Townsend.
Yes, for the music, of course, always. Don't want to forget them. And thanks to, of course, to the lovely Ashaya for being the best and for wearing so many hats and all the various things that she does to make this show excellent. Allegedly excellent. That's my take.
Thanks.
And of course, so tune in to I Know That Nerd, whether you're catching this later or live. And we'll see you guys all next time. You know what to do in the meantime. Valar Rereadis.